025. Ross didn't believe a word of Fig's bald head. If these financial gangsters are really willing to show mercy to the world, it must be the sun rising from the west. These words are nothing more than trying to find a suitable reason for his behavior of betraying Osborn and to communicate with him. Ross, an up-and-comer, is getting closer, so that he can take a considerable part of the benefits from him in the future. Maybe that's what S.H.I.E.L.D did to Osborn back then. But if he wants to take advantage of Ross, it depends first on whether he can live so long. As for biological materials, it is not surprising that S.H.I.E.L.D knows that Ross and Connors have been screening personnel in the laboratory. The reliable and talented ones will be kept for reuse with a salary increase, and vice versa. For those who are left behind, a reasonable reward and punishment mechanism can effectively stimulate their self-motivation, and it is normal for those who leave to reveal some information to the outside world, but they never want to get in touch with the real secrets. However, this gentleman dared to extend his hand so long and added a reason for his own death in Invisible. In the future, it depends on how he passed away, whether he was killed by Rage's Green Goblin or fell into Ross's hands. No matter what, his ending will not change. What are you laughing at? Sitting in the car, Mary Jane sensitively noticed that the corners of her boyfriend's lips curled up. It's nothing, Ross said softly, stroking her knee. I suddenly discovered that it seems that a bald man in a wheelchair can always say a lot of great truths without changing his face. Leaving the stadium, it was still early, so Ross and Mary Jane decided to go to the nearby Central Park for a rare date. The two have been too busy recently. I never imagined in high school that you would become a manufacturer like Stark or Osborn and negotiate business face-to-face with the generals of the Ministry of Defense on the golf course. In the carousel hall, 57 lifelike and brightly colored wooden horses carry large the small file-sized tourists kept spinning, and Mary Jane snuggled into Ross's arms, happily riding on the back of one of the wooden horses and yelling, looking up at his clear profile after sweating. It's unbelievable. The founder of Stark is just the son of a fruit merchant. You see, my starting point seems to be a little higher than his. My father was at least a biologist. Ross smiled and turned her. The slightly tilted body straightened itself so as not to accidentally fall. The red-haired girl shook her head vigorously, completely disapproving of his understated self-effacing. How long ago was that? I know some history. There is no big order. How could Stark rise so fast? Every year in the newspaper it is mentioned that someone started a business and got the first pot of gold, but I have never seen someone who got a stake in a big company like Osborn so quickly and then worked with the Department of Defense. In the eyes of girls, her boyfriend's achievements are definitely different, but what she said is not outrageous. It is not difficult to achieve one of them. With new technology, he became famous and entered the sight of big companies, and then he was acquired. There are not a few young people who hold shares, but there are not many people like Ross who complete invention, hold shares, sell, and enter new fields in less than a year. This kind of leapfrog development is in addition to all the conveniences he originally had, but also because he always understood where his path was headed and was the result of unswervingly pushing forward. Sobriety and blindness can easily form a deep watershed in life. The former can often go further, while the latter is often just a waste of time. Ross is undoubtedly the sober person. He cannot guarantee that every step he takes is extremely correct, but he will try his best to plan his life in advance, pursue the things that are really worth having, avoid troubles that could have been avoided, and make every step closer to himself duty of. In fact, defense contractors are not easy. The outside world often notices the large orders and high profits they get from the military, but they don't see that big companies like Osborn may also fall into the quagmire due to poor research and development. The biggest problem in this industry is to control costs, and cost increases will continue to eat up profits, and may even drag the entire company into trouble. Ross felt a little emotional. He saw Osborn step by step into desperation and how to rely on luck to get through the danger. This is an excellent warning, reminding latecomers to pay attention to risks. Hearing what he said, Mary Jane was a little worried. Then let's return the apartment. I still have some money in my hand. Although the amount is not much, it may be useful, she suggested with a restrained smile. The luxury apartment on 57th Street was originally purchased by Ross in the name of Mary Jane. Yes, this gift once surprised her so much that she lived in a dream for several days. But now she would rather give back such a large amount of property for her boyfriend, which really surprised Ross. Their relationship is a bit strange. They lived in the same community and knew each other very early, from elementary school to 12th grade. Throughout their teenage years, they never called. It was not until after Ross came that the two met in a short time. When they come together, it is not so much a love that produces feelings, but a natural attraction between a man and a woman. It is undeniable that Ross has a mentality of hunting delicious food, and Mary Jane is somewhat vain. Don't put more pressure on yourself, you should have confidence in me. But MJ, I seem to like you more and more, Ross said softly, lifted the girl's round jaw, and lowered his head deeply. The date is over? As soon as Ross walked into the laboratory on 97th Street the next day, Gwen came over automatically, staring at him ambiguously with a pair of beautiful big eyes. Her younger brother, Howard, happened to meet Ross and the other two in the park the day before. He watched from a distance and didn't come to disturb him. When he returned, he leaked the secret to his sister. Now Gwen has been promoted to the chief assistant with her own hard work. Not only are all the interns under her command, but also a few new researchers. However, this time is enough for Ross to understand the girl's personality, which is different from the bright and reserved superficial impression. In private, Gwen Stacy is quite a witty guy, with a somewhat carefree and rough personality. Like now, she's moaning in self-pity for her blonde ponytail, pulling her hair out from behind and complaining to Ross. You guys are dating in the park. We can only deal with strange things in the laboratory. So tired that the color of our hair has faded, yellow like dishwater. For the sake of hard work, kind Mr. Byrne, shouldn't we be thinking about a raise for us poor souls? With her standing in front, several young interns shouted together. This is why Ross usually looks very easygoing. If it were Connors, these guys could only work hard like a mouse seeing a cat. However, Ross didn't care about small material rewards. According to the terms formulated at the time of signing the contract, there were already relevant content on it, and as long as the procedures were met, they could be signed and implemented. Has the work assigned to you been completed? Ross asked casually. Definitely, mentioning the business. Gwen quickly entered the state and turned back to a calm and wise top student. She took Ross to the showroom, where Connor's students were facing a translucent ultra-thin vest do the finishing touches. This is a new type of bulletproof equipment made according to Ross's instructions. It consists of 2 layers of human tissue and a layer of super cobweb sandwiched in the middle of a 3-layer bulletproof skin. The first-level bulletproof vest can resist a rifle bullet fired from a 0.22-inch caliber with a maximum weight of no more than 2.6 grams and a maximum speed of no more than 329 yards per second. According to our tests, the new model product is not only adequate for police use, but also can block submachine gun bullets with a caliber of 0.35 inches or even larger caliber bullets. There is no problem in purchasing through the Ministry of National Defense. In addition, it must be pointed out that its material 100% elastic, extremely light. Similar products sell more than 100,000 pieces per year in the civilian market, and each piece is as high as $2,000, but compared with our products, they need to be lined with steel plates or targeted thickening, and the weight is the lowest above 2.6 pounds. With our products, the old body armor can only be thrown into the garbage dump, Mr. Byrne. I think we have dug a gold mine. Lewis, the project director, flushed with excitement. Lewis was recommended by Connors. He also graduated from the State University of New York and worked as a graduate student of Connors. After graduation, he has been working for another research laboratory, but he was not valued by his boss. He resigned from his position without any hesitation and jumped over here. As far as Ross sees it, Lewis's strength lies not in scientific research, but in his sensitivity to the market. He is always particularly keen on this aspect, and the cutting-edge laboratory to be established just needs such a person, so he has no judgment on Lewis. No doubt, the value of the new body armor is not the 2 layers of artificial skin tissue, which are bland, but the layer of cobweb that is really valuable. Spider-Man Peter often worries about not getting more salary, but he doesn't know that he is passed by a treasure house. Even if such a guy succeeds in graduating, Ross doubts whether he can become the one he wants to be. An outstanding scientist no matter what era, scientists who go the wrong way are always difficult to be recognized by society, especially in modern society. Scientists who can create output value are good scientists. Pete would never guess how much the 15 super spiders at Columbia had done for Ross. I agree with Louis. Ross picked up an experimental gun, and the researchers stepped back. There are 300 million guns in the US, almost one more, and other countries are trying to disarm. But here we are, where people say let's protect ourselves, and from that perspective, our product has a bright future. As he spoke, he lightly pulled the trigger, and several bullets with small sparks rushed towards the target from the barrel. After a few muffled noises, they fell to the ground one after another, almost unscathed. Find a professional designer, redesign the shape, and prepare samples for the Ministry of Defense as soon as possible, Ross ordered, and dropped the gun. Now he was going to the confidential area of the laboratory, where a guest who had been forgotten for many days was waiting to be interviewed. 026. As a hidden killer, Bullseye's real name is no longer available, and even he himself sometimes has to be in a trance for a while before he can recall the name that has been discarded deep in his memory. For this killer, career, family, love, money, and all kinds of extraneous things are not important. The only thing Bullseye pursues is the momentary satisfaction when he takes someone's life away. Just imagine, when he appeared beside the target like a ghost, gently waved at the distorted expression of the target, and then only heard a soft swipe. Flying darts or knives flashed coldly and went straight to the vital point, and then the person took struggling in pain with endless fear. His body convulsed and twitched like an electric shock. Thick, sauce-red blood smeared the floor, but in the end all efforts were in vain, and the only thing he could do was to swallow the last breath. Helplessly, in extreme panic tone, how exciting this feeling is. Every time he sees this scene, Bullseye will feel an indescribable power roaring in his heart. This feeling is fascinating. Killing brings honor and is an eternal pursuit. For a long time, Bullseye believes in this wholeheartedly, just like the most devout believers trust in God. Until that day, an unfathomable black shadow broke into the lair of the boss Jean Bing and knocked the famous killer Wang Xiangxing out of the French window on the balcony with a single blow. Bullseye still remembers the moment when he came out of the broken window. The cold wind was howling outside, the night sky was bright, the Star River was vast in the dark sky, and the file-size square like a matchbox 200 feet away was also brightly lit. Only himself drenched in cold sweat. The incontinent heat flowed uncontrollably all over the trousers. Fortunately, he didn't fall down and be smashed to pieces, but he had to curl up beside the outer wall of the building's top floor. He used all his strength to grab the little protrusions on the building, wishing he could cling tightly to the smooth wall surface like a humble bug. Only then did he realize how small and weak he was. Then he lost consciousness, and when he woke up, he was in a sealed space. "Is anyone there?" Bullseye yelled hoarsely after regaining some strength, but there was still no reply. Hitting the wall hard, the crimson wall panel has a strange elasticity, faintly feels like living tissue. The fist hits hard, and immediately sinks into it with the wrist level, almost being pulled inward by the gravity like sucking. Frightened, he hastily pulled out his arm and fled to the center of the room in a rolling and crawling manner. But no matter how he dodged, he was covered and surrounded by strange biological materials in all directions, as if being swallowed in the stomach of a giant beast. Depression and fear almost drove him crazy. Fortunately, this material has been changing slowly. It seems that a hand is constantly manipulating them behind the wall, making the deep red color gradually become lighter and whiter, and the wriggling surface is gradually smoother and smoother, until it is as normal and natural as ordinary plastic materials. At this moment, Bullseye had lost all thought of escaping. He knew that he had fallen into the hands of a mysterious organization with super technology. "Don't scare yourself, buddy. The most dangerous time is over. As long as they don't kill me, it means I'm still useful, and I'll definitely see the sun outside again," Bullseye said to himself, which somewhat made him recover a little spirit. But then he had to face another problem. That is, when would outsiders come in to contact him? At least give him something to eat and drink. How could he have imagined that Ross had completely left his captor behind? So the days continued to pass like this, and the time could not be distinguished in the dark room. Only the beard on the lips was growing wantonly, and soon the hunger began to cause great troubles for the famous killer, because there was nothing for digestion. The stomach acid gradually eroded the internal organs, like a frenzied flame burning inside his body. He could almost hear his heart beating, and at the same time his throat tightened, and sweat oozed out like countless bugs, all over the surface of his skin. Bullseye began to panic, and reluctantly waited for a while, and finally couldn't bear it any longer. He slammed into the wall desperately with his last strength. Just as he rushed over desperately, a big hole suddenly appeared in the front wall, and both sides the biomaterial rolled up automatically like a curtain, and then a person walked in from the outside. When Ross walked into the training room, the first thing he saw was the red-eyed assassin king rushing towards him like crazy. "You are so brave. I want to impress you," he admired, and waved it out. There is no smoke and fire in this wave, just like brushing the weeping willow branches and leaves that cover the view when you go out in the countryside in spring. It is as freehand and natural. A casual hand wave. If it's Bullseye and wants to drive away the opponent, no matter what, you have to stretch your muscles and exert strength. If you encounter a powerful person, you may have to bend over and pose slightly, tense your whole body and let out a loud roar, focusing on the opponent. To oppress the past, the more fierce the expression is, the more deterrent it will be. But Ross's swing was much more casual. He kept walking, and without even shaking his body, the back of his palm made intimate contact with Bullseye's right cheek. With a clear and crisp paw, the king of assassins swooped forward with all his strength. Just like that, rolled and flew out. He hit the wall on the other side heavily and fell down again. Bullseye was hit hard. Lying on the ground in a state of embarrassment, his head was buzzing like an orchestra. After dozens of seconds, only then did he regain consciousness. At this time, half of his face was numb, and a few bleeding teeth fell from his mouth mixed with clean water to the ground. The pain was so painful that he could hardly even raise his breathing strength. At this time, Ross's expression remained the same. The clouds are light and the wind is clear. Why can't we just sit down and talk peacefully? He grumbled, dropping a few electronic tools on Bullseye. So to cut a long story short, I want you to do a few things. After explaining, Ross left the cultivation room. The biological material behind him closed automatically, and then Dr. Connors walked over. Can I leave it to him? Dr. Momo's ungrown right arm felt a little worried. I've heard about Bullseye. He's a scorpion who can do nothing but sting. Believe me, this is the best candidate, and in fact, we don't have more people to do it, Ross replied. He returned to the console, turned on the monitoring equipment, and then the Bullseye in the secret room appeared on one of the screens, and the other screens showed the landscapes of different regions. Some were the corner of a town in the bustling suburbs, and some were remote and desolate wilderness. Outer Reservoir, as well as a certain prison building near the Pentagon in Arlington County. This is the instant information obtained by Ross through network intrusion into spy satellites and police monitoring systems. Before this long-awaited opportunity comes, remind the people here to make early preparations. The police came to make a record yesterday. They found out from Jean Bing's subordinates that Jean Bing had given instructions related to us before his death. Doctor, after you were taken away, you were involved in the highway incident. Although no one has arrested you yet. In connection with that incident, there is no evidence to support this view, but if someone continues to investigate, it may cause some unnecessary trouble. So we better let the outside world focus on Kim and Green Goblin's relationship. If they think it's an intra-gang conflict, then we can clear all suspicion. That's a way, too. If he's willing to cooperate, the doctor admitted, before bringing up Osborn again. Norman may not be able to bear it anymore. I heard from former Osborn colleagues that Feige and Balkan have requested a meeting of the board of directors to urgently discuss important issues that will determine the future fate of the company. I know Norman very well. He is a very conceited man. People will never stand by and watch others take their things. Ross also knew the news. It was the best way. He was already a little impatient with the troublesome Mr. Osborn, and hoped that he could be sent on the road as soon as possible, so as not to affect the next plan. Don't forget, before those magical gems show up one by one, his goal is always ability's strange mutant. To gain control of this group, the first thing to face is the two most powerful mutant forces. It is not easy to avoid the sight of Charles Xavier in every action. Once the Mind Master discovers Ross's secret, he will never let his students sit back and watch someone take advantage of his mutant compatriots, and the Mutant Brotherhood will not tolerate outsiders' meddle. So if you want to make a breakthrough here, you must defeat these two opponents at the same time. And you cannot let the old enemies of Professor X and Magneto relax. If any one of them is let go, they will not allow the other side of their interdependence to be completely wiped out by outsiders, and that will be a catastrophe for the mutant society. If that happens, it will be tantamount to poking a hornet's nest for Ross. Although he still has contingency measures to counter it, he will inevitably expose his secrets to those who want to, which is not worth the loss. Therefore, the elite army under General Stryker, who has a deep relationship with Mutant and hates him so deeply, is his best assistant. Ross has calculated many times that Magneto was trapped in the underground prison. Sabretooth and Toad, who were usually treated harshly by him, were rescued and temporarily stood by his side. The only trusted assistant outside was Mystique. Stryker had no reason not to launch a conspiracy at this time. He must take advantage of this golden opportunity to attract Professor X, and after controlling him, he can use the strongest Mind Master to realize his dream of destroying all mutants. At that time, it was the best opportunity for Ross. He could take advantage of the opportunity and get what he had been waiting for a long time. Ross stared at the screen. In the closed training room, Bullseye sat up tremblingly and began to pick up the things he threw on him as he wanted. Very well, that's right. Dr. Connors next to him rubbed his shoulders and finally smiled. At this moment, Ross's cell phone rang. He looked at the calling number and pressed the answer button. Peter's reluctant voice came from the microphone. Well, Ross, I want to ask you for help. 027. Although Peter's interview was a bit sloppy, the Daily Bugle attached great importance to it. The newspaper's president, J. Jonah James, used his skills as a reporter when he was young and personally edited the interview draft overnight. Published on the front page of the next day's newspaper. The title is, There is a Successor to Tony Stark. Under this strange topic, James compared the missing Playboy with a large photo of Ross side by side. The two people who were completely irrelevant were processed by him and suddenly attracted people's interest. They are also young and promising, have the same outstanding talents, are also good at creating topics, and even experience a lot in common, which is really surprising. Aside from the similarity slipping away from award shows, Tony Stark is known to have had a wild, flamboyant life until his father died and took on the responsibility of reviving the company's reputation, while Ross unexpectedly, he was also similar to him. Those disgraceful deeds before reincarnation were dug up by reporters and beautified as a common problem common to geniuses when they were young. Someone stood up and talked about it to the media, proving from the side that he is that kind of person. After the profile was completed, the report began to count Ross's assets. I don't know how James obtained the transaction data between him and Norman. In this initial transaction, Ross and Doctor received a total of $50 million in cash and $460 million worth of Osborn Industrial shares. This figure seems large, but it is not high compared to the market prospects of new products. The Bugle Daily quoted similar acquisition cases of large companies such as Watson Pharmaceuticals in the previous year, confirming that Osborn had made a value-for-money transaction, and speculated that this was due to the personal relationship between Ross and Harry, which played a role. So the individual only received $30 million in cash and half of the shares. Fortunately, these shares later appreciated as Osborn's stock price rebounded, and then were sold to other board members at a very favorable price. The estimated personal profit was 380 million yuan, so the property totaled $410 million. Part of the money was used by Ross to buy a luxury apartment with the highest altitude and the most expensive in New York City, but it was not in his own name, but was extremely generously given to an unknown actor girlfriend to please her, and in addition to showing love for charity, the other part is mostly used for new investment. Reporter Parker claimed that his old classmate planned to establish a research institution called Cutting Edge Technology Laboratory in the suburbs of New York. Manufacturing ability can create a large number of local job opportunities. Considering that the Ministry of Defense's latest list of defense contractors includes the name of the Cutting Edge Technology Laboratory, the prospect of this yet-to-be-established institution is also promising. Compared with Tony, the Playboy's personal wealth currently totals $6.8 billion, which is 17 times that of Ross. But please note that this figure is the cumulative operating income of the two generations of Stark family father and son for 60 years, while Ross is it is the income within 1 year. In addition, although both are high-tech rich people who have created wealth with wisdom and used new technological inventions to grow rapidly, but considering the fact that Mr. Stark may have been killed, the Bugle Daily insists that the potential of the younger generation bigger. This report by the Bugle Daily confuses many people. A considerable number of these people are people who love to get novelty news from tabloid newspapers. They are the main readers of gossip newspapers. News such as Regal pays special attention. The concentrated hype on Ross this time does not mean that he can really be compared with Stark now, but that he has suddenly lost this consistent and popular news source. Newspapers and readers are desperately in need. One person stood up to fill in the gaps, so when Ross, who had a lot of similarities, appeared, the heads of the newspapers immediately lit up and immediately selected the target. In the words of James, Peter's boss, I was considering whether to use Victor Doom or Justin Hammer as the future cover character, and then Ross came out, and it felt like flowing down a waterfall. Straight down. I can't get rid of that feeling at all. Just happened to have Parker in the newspaper, and he won the first-hand information for us. So thanks to Ross. Although Spider-Man Peter has gone on a rough road on the road of superhero, his journalist career is quite different from the original timeline, and he unexpectedly got a pretty good starting point. After the relatively objective part above, the final length of the article finally reveals James' true gossip. He published the photos of Ross and Pepper talking intimately that someone accidentally took on the lawn of the State University on the day of the awards, trying to prove that there is a special affection between the two men and women. The new Stark and he often act as Stark spokespersons. It must be quite exciting and explosive news. The other accidental shooter was Osborn. The unlucky Norman did not attend the awards ceremony of his business partner, and Ross later sold his shares, which was interpreted by the Bugle Daily as Osborn's partnership with Ross breaks down. These two pieces of news attracted many good people. Pepper and Norman came out to refute the rumors. The former said it was a complete misunderstanding, and now she only pays attention to the rescue work of her employer Tony. Okay, and the relationship with Ross is still maintained. After such a hype, the sales volume of the various newspapers increased greatly, and the advertising expenses also rebounded, which was basically the same as before Stark disappeared, so everyone was happy. In addition to the reports on Ross, there was another news that attracted the attention of the public on this day. This news is the declaration of war against Green Goblin by the notorious killer Bullseye, a henchman of the assassinated tycoon Jean-Bin not long ago. This is a shameless attack, and I have to take revenge. I didn't do it for money. My employer is very rich and generous. I have been working for Mr. Jean-Bin for a long time. He is a kind person. When he is around, I feel very happy, but the Green Goblin ghost ruined our relationship. I swear that I will tear off the green skin, cut off his head, and use his blood to wash away my shame. Bullseye's declaration of war was uploaded to the social networking site along with a video. The exact address cannot be traced. Judging from the screen, this extremely murderous guy suffered serious injuries, and the deep-rooted hatred rushed to his face without concealment. Based on this, the police deduced that Jean-Bing's death was also related to Green Goblin, which was extremely serious. It may be caused by the private struggle of the gang forces, which ruled out the suspicion of other people including Dr. Connors, focused on Green Goblin and the Spider-Man who appeared later, and aimed at the possibility of killing Bullseye at any time a defense plan was formulated. And the sales of police armor such as bulletproof vests increased sharply. At the moment, it has been a long time since Jean-Bing's death, and he has lost his deterrent power. The crimes that he tried to cover up before have been exposed by hostile forces one after another, such as producing and selling drugs, kidnapping and murdering, organizing gangsters, and assisting unscrupulous politicians and corporate suppression of fishing boats. If the underworld tycoon at the moment is still alive, the sum of all the crimes is enough for the federal judge to send him to the highest prison for hundreds of years. Now, although he is dead, some accomplices must also be interrogated and wanted. The only innocent person in the whole incident was Peter. He would never have thought that his unintentional help would ruin Spider-Man's reputation. Previous deeds of helping others were completely ignored. Under the reprimand, he could only hide his battle suit aggrievedly and do his job well for the time being. Definitely, this may not be a bad thing, considering his original fate. Maybe only when the identity of Spider-Man disappears, Peter Parker can live like a normal person again. Although he was not so reconciled, thinking that he was just unlucky, someone had another point of view. The masked superhero era may soon be over, Ross said in a discussion with Gwen during a work break. Why? Gwen asked curiously, blinking her long eyelashes. One of the few things she and Mary Jane had in common was a fondness for Spider-Man. Ross definitely has his reasons. Recently, Congress is considering a bill to strengthen the security of mutant. After the series of incidents on Liberty Island, many people began to think that they need to protect their own safety, so they plan to install surveillance cameras in big cities to monitor possible attacks. In fact, Peter is an acquired super ability, but from the outside world, he seems to be no different from mutant. So many people currently classify him as the mutant side, which also brings him more potential opponents. If the bill is successfully passed, then we will usher in an era of ubiquitous surveillance cameras. Ross counted with his fingers. Imagine, an office worker wakes up in the morning, goes to check the mailbox outside the door to get a newspaper, and is photographed by the camera on the driveway of the neighbor's house across the street, drives to work, and is photographed by the electronic eyes at the intersection. He will be photographed withdrawing money from a cash machine. He will be photographed walking into a convenience store. He will be photographed filling up at a gas station. He will be photographed driving on an interstate highway. When he arrives at the office, the camera is still indispensable. In this way, his exposure rate has far exceeded that of any talk show host at around 8 o'clock in the morning. The only difference is that he is on CCTV. Ross drank, explaining with the coffee brought by his girlfriend. The girl opposite shuddered when he heard the scene he described. That's too scary. There are no private secrets at all. I absolutely don't agree with the passage of this kind of bill. Gwen waved her arms excitedly and accidentally knocked down the cup in Mary Jane's hand, not only spilling the coffee all over the floor and splashed all over Ross, so he stood up and helped her clean up. Ross sat in his seat without changing his face and continued to savor the taste slowly. At present, the biggest reason for blocking this bill is not that ordinary citizens may be recorded more than 20 times a day without knowing it, but that the state government's budget is insufficient and the federal government is unwilling to allocate funds, so Spider-Man can still live a comfortable life, he said casually, while Gwen kept complaining. She took out her handkerchief and carefully wiped a large amount of thick liquid on Ross's body. In order to make up for the mistake, she and Ross unconsciously got closer and closer, so that you didn't notice at all that Mary Jane's face was a little ugly when she was squeezed outside. 028. On this day, after returning to the new home, Mary Jane had a rare temper tantrum. She became a little wary of Gwen, not wanting to see her beautiful high school classmates always lingering around her boyfriend. This was originally an inconspicuous little thing in life, but because Ross liked to see her puffy, he deliberately took the opportunity to tease his girlfriend for a whole night before the two fell asleep. Then, he had a strange dream. In the dream, he was standing on the top of a tall building, and above him was a huge, extremely dark cloud. The dark clouds hung down very low, and seemed to be pressed down from the top at any time, gestating in the rolling dark clouds. There was lightning, and from time to time bursts of dazzling flashes burst out like sharp swords, as if to split the entire sky into two. Through the weak part of the cloud layer, the monstrous sunlight faintly projected down, erecting bleak beams of light like bloodshot threads obliquely on the vast land. With these dim lights, one can see the endless crowds in the vast wilderness, countless shaky shadows swarming from all directions in the darkness, forming a huge human frenzy, heading towards the world like a stormy sea. Converge in the direction of Ross. The future is our time. A familiar yet unfamiliar voice quietly sounded from the bottom of Ross's heart. This voice seemed to be a decree from heaven, promising him all authority, but he just kept silent, like a man with a heart of stone, never responding to the temptation. So that voice gradually receded, and rationality regained control of the body. Opening his eyes again, Ross completely returned to reality. It was already late at night, and it was very dark outside. In the neighboring apartment buildings, there were only a few dozen windows with lights on, and some even reflected the flickering fluorescence of the TV screen. Gently moving away the warm limbs on his body, Ross slowly sat up. No more. Perhaps the soft bed shook a little when she got up, and Mary Jane, who was curled up next to her, muttered in a daze. Sweat is drenched, until now. Ross can still feel the moist moisture on the white plumpness playfully exposed in the skirt of her pajamas. That is because the fine beads of sweat used to spread all over the body, even like a stream of nimble streams along the deep gully poured into the cotton fabric under the body. No. She suddenly closed her eyes and yelled endlessly. At the same time, she beat Ross's sleeping position bitterly. After pounding for nothing, she frowned pitifully and continued to fall into a coma. Ross smiled, carefully draped the thin quilt on his girlfriend's curvy body, and walked to the window alone to breathe the fresh air from the central empty garden. When passing by the full-length mirror, he saw himself in the mirror, the self who looked very different from his previous life, but had the same temperament. The tall and well-proportioned body contained strong muscles, and the smooth lines were like sculptures by famous artists, delicate enough to dazzle. The longer he came to this world, the more he felt that his previous life was like an illusory dream. Fortunately, no matter when, there is always something worth pursuing. They are what life is all about. Bathed in the cool night breeze, Ross quietly looked at the vast world outside, and soon his phone lit up. Surveillance video shows Osborn start to act. In the microphone, Dr. Connor's intermittent voice was kept low. Ross listened to the latest news he observed, and his thinking entered a state of high-speed operation. Is there anything unusual in Westchester? He temporarily put aside the news of Osborn, and instead focused on news from the small town where the X-Men Academy is located. Everything is normal. No people or vehicles have been observed. The local civil system shows that the water flow around the campus has not increased or decreased compared with domestic garbage in the past. There is no fluctuation in power supply. The doctor reported the data that Ross asked him to observe one by one. These data were the instant information obtained by Ross intruding into the server of the small town's billing platform for people's livelihood. It could cover a distance of hundreds of miles and avoid Professor X's mind monitoring through the optical fiber network. Indirectly grasp the mutant movement of Xavier Academy. In order to more accurately discover the pattern of target activities, Ross even paid a lot of money to customize a private database from the best software company in the industry. After adjusting the program by himself, he loaded the data from Xavier College to establish a basically complete feedback model to analyze X-Men's behavior patterns. To put it bluntly, as long as he is given enough time, he can immediately understand what the teachers and students of the college ate, what kind of private exercise they did, and even what color underwear they wore. Professor X, the Mind Master, will never catch his trace. Tomorrow will be a good day. On the other side of the phone, the doctor's voice was disturbed and excited. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. But Ross didn't make a decision right away. He stood in front of the window like a stone statue and deduced it over and over again. Connors didn't disturb his thoughts on the other side, quietly waiting for the final judgment. Finally, Ross nodded and issued the predetermined command. After hanging up the phone, he looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows to the western sky. What was Osborn doing there? This evening, there are disturbing fluctuations brewing in the dead Osborn Industrial Park. Usually at this time, the researchers who have been busy for a day have already returned home from get-off work. After the hustle and bustle of the day, the buildings in the park should be peaceful at this moment, but today is a little different. A dozen mercenary-looking men with unusually sturdy stature passed through the strict security guards program, gathered in the clinical research room of the drug that prohibits outsiders from entering and leaving, and looked at the movement inside the transparent glass cover. He took off his clothes and got in. Very good, that's it. Norman stepped on the floor with bare feet. Feeling the power emerging from his body, he picked up a metal experimental tool and twisted it at will. The steel cylinder was originally very sturdy, and it will not be damaged in the slightest even if it is accidentally dropped to the ground. But this time when it is subjected to huge pressure, it quickly loses its shape like a soft wax figure. Thank you, Connors. Thank you, Ross. I have to say, the original physical enhancement potion can't do the secondary strengthening. This is all thanks to your invention. Now I am stronger than before, he said to himself, clenching his fists into a pose. Looking at the vainly stretched muscles, the surrounding mercenaries involuntarily swallowed dryly. They are all private troops hired by Norman through secret channels. Since he suffered a setback on the road last time, he came back to sleep in bed and reflected for a few days, and finally decided to kill all the obtrusive people before the meeting of the board of directors. In the original plan, he could solve everything alone, but the appearance of Dr. Lizard changed his mind. The embarrassing retreat that night made Norman deeply understand that he is not the only one in this world who ignores Superman's power. Everything you want, Dr. Connors, who has been obsessed with cross-species research for many years, seems to have the same point of view as himself. That's why Dr. Lizard was born. Accidental miss. After so many days, I don't know if Connors guessed that Green Goblin's real identity is himself. Will Ross be able to transform like him? From Norman's own point of view, it is unbelievable to share power with others for no reason, but that does not prevent Norman from making a plan. This time he must completely strangle his powerful opponent. As for the price he promised, in addition to the huge bounty, it is to turn these daring mercenaries into Superman like himself. With his back turned to his temporary subordinates, Norman's eyes shone with a strange green light. He had already planned that once the target was wiped out, he would immediately backhand and wipe out these unstable factors behind. He was sure he could do it. Just as he was changing his clothes, the chief scientific officer who was supposed to go home suddenly appeared. Dr. Storm, the scientific officer, just walked into the research room and was immediately taken aback. A dozen murderous men stared at him closely. Break into a heavily armed barracks. Norman, what are you going to do? Dr. Storm couldn't help taking a step back and screamed in shock. Before he could get an answer, he lost track of his boss in a blink of an eye, and then heard the door behind him slam. There was a sound, and it was closed by someone. When he turned his head hastily, he found Norman Osborn looking at him with a cold smile, and one hand was letting go of the handle behind the door. Doctor, before I answer, why don't you tell me why you are here? Norman approached the elderly science officer step by step, and the old man who had worked with him for many years had to stagger back. It's Harry, Storm replied tremblingly, uttering a name that surprised Norman. Harry knows you're in a bad mood. He's worried that your working hours will hurt your health, so he asked me to come back and persuade you to rest. I have no other intentions. Lie. Interrupting Dr. Storm, Norman's eyes were red, and he yelled, grabbing him by the collar. Lies, all lies. You think I don't know? You guys are trying to steal my company and take my property before it's acquired? Everyone's cheating on me, but I've seen you through from the beginning. You villains, you poor bastards. You think you can get everything from me, but you are wrong. I am not a lamb at the mercy of others. I am a demon who wants to kill people. While screaming, he lifted Storm high. The science officer's weak neck was tightly held by his big hands. His face was flushed red, but he couldn't breathe. He struggled to break Norman's fingers with both hands. The feet that left the ground kept kicking and hitting the opponent's body, but Norman was as hard as steel. No matter what kind of blow, he could make him retreat half a step. Storm's body soon twitched, and after a while, the science officer swallowed his last breath in despair. Tomorrow, let all troubles end. Leaving the old man's body behind, Norman Osborn walked to the window and looked far to the east. 029. The day that was expected by all parties came soon. Before 7 o'clock, the golden sunlight in the morning had flooded the entire bedroom through the large floor-to-ceiling windows. Ross dragged Lai Chuang's girlfriend and helped her change clothes. The two had a quick breakfast before sending her to the car. "Do you still remember what you were going to do today?" Before leaving, he asked through the car window. "Definitely." The lazy Mary Jane exudes a strong femininity, throwing a 1 at her boyfriend charmingly. "I'm going to stay in the lab obediently and cheer on your employees, so they can cheer up and work hard." "That's right. Beautiful women are infinitely charming. Believe in yourself." Ross gave her a thumbs up, squinted his eyes and smiled, bent down and kissed the girl's smooth face, and then turned to Sabretooth Victor, who was sitting in the passenger seat. He waved his hand to signal them to leave. "Remember, Ross, I want to give you a surprise." Amidst the girl's voice, the car slowly drove out of 57th Street. "There will definitely be a surprise, and I will personally dedicate it to the whole world. As for now, I am going to the battlefield, and I hope my lovely friends will not be late," he murmured, and put on a miniature headset for himself. This day is the day of the famous local corporate Thanksgiving Day Parade, which began in 1924 and has a history of 80 years. It will be held on time on the fourth Thursday of November every year, even during the Great War. In the beginning, it was just an activity used by local companies to promote their brand image and ease labor management relations, but today, it has become an extremely grand Thanksgiving celebration, attracting millions of people to watch along the way every year. Tens of millions of people watch the broadcast on TV. As a well-known rookie in the local business circle, Ross was definitely invited by the organizers. The attendees were all senior executives of major companies, including the major shareholder of Osborn. In this way, including Ross, the bait is basically ready, and an excellent mobile phone opportunity is in front of us. Mr. Green Goblin, who loves the limelight, will not be temporarily frightened by too many audiences. At 9 o'clock, a parade of 10,000 people composed of employees of local companies set off from the intersection of 77th Street and Central Park West Avenue to officially kick off the parade. Their team included more than 1,000 cheerleaders and hundreds of jokers, 10 bands, and multiple giant cartoon image balloons. When the parade approached, people who had already been waiting on both sides of the road applauded, especially when the cartoon stars who were several floors high were dragged slowly by the car. Both adults and children cheered with screams. The atmosphere at the scene was extremely warm. This is just a pre-dinner dessert. When the team went around for a week and entered the destination of the parade, Bethesda Fountain Square in Central Park, in the core area of the park between the lake and the shade, people from all over the United States, the most popular entertainers, will join forces on stage. As far as Ross knows, Mary Jane is very envious of these lucky big-name stars, but her qualifications and popularity are too shallow, and it is only a matter of heaven if she wants to play here. After getting out of the car, Ross kept shaking hands with strangers, especially when he saw the two major shareholders of Osborn. He waved and greeted them, but he didn't go forward. He walked back and forth among the crowd of entrepreneurs and executives, while talking to unspecified passers-by. If a very careful observer has been paying attention to him, he may find his throat trembling slightly. Want to participate in the topic, but don't know how to join the relatively conservative circle of friends. In fact, he just used the throat microphone to talk to the doctor who was far away in the laboratory. "Doctor, can you see me? How's the lab?" Ross' voice came to 97th Street clearly through the tiny drone hovering in midair, only the size of a sparrow file. "It can be seen." Connors sat in front of the screen and gave a short report. At the laboratory side, the monitoring found a sniper ambushing on the opposite building, which is one of the 3 best shooting locations you pointed out in advance. Marco has already walked across the road and is now approaching that building. As soon as Green Goblin appears, go up and deal with him. "Great start, but stay vigilant," Ross warned. Sniper rifles are not a novelty nowadays, but their lethality is still astonishing. Excellent firearms fire faster than sound. If 2 people are talking face-to-face, and suddenly one of them sees his friend's head broken, then it was several seconds before he heard the gunshot. It seems that this is a surprise specially prepared by Green Goblin for Dr. Lizard, but since it is discovered in advance, the threat is greatly reduced. The other party's fund account is monitored in real time by Ross through the banking system, so there is no need to worry too much about suddenly being caught by the sniper. Another killer jumped out. After the exchange of messages, Ross took a glass of wine from the tray of the passing waiter, covering the conversation with wine tasting. "Everything is developing as expected. Pay attention to observe the changes and contact in time if there is any situation." In addition, Todd's command power has been handed over to you. He can move according to the fountain as the center of the circle. I will notify you in advance if you need help. Understood, Connors solemnly promised, although Toad's image is wretched but not as conspicuous as others, so he is more suitable for public activities. The earphones fell silent, and at the moment 2 women in costumes walked up to Ross. Hi. One of them smiled and held out a hand. A woman Ross didn't expect to meet here. Susan Storm. The person reported her name. This is a hot blonde beauty with a mixed-race appearance. She looked at Ross with a smile and dragged Ross's acquaintance with the other hand. Stark's secretary, Miss Pepper. Ever since the Daily Bugle and other gossip tabloids claimed that the two had an ambiguous relationship, Miss Secretary had never met Ross again, and it was the first time they met until now. It seems that if Susan hadn't dragged her here, Pei-Pum may still keep his distance from the object of his rumors. After a brief chat, Susan made no secret of her curiosity and intention of coming. She knew that Pepper was very unhappy in the company after losing her backer, so she wanted to use Ross, an unknown acquaintance, to persuade her to switch to her boyfriend's company. Pepper is a very smart person, not only smart, but also capable. We used to know it when we were in State University by us. I mean me and Victor, and definitely this one. Susan pointed to the man approaching. Her tone was a little cold, but when she turned to Ross, she smiled again. We are all classmates at the State University, and we are your seniors, Susan said with a smile. I heard from my mentor that Mr. Richards said, I'm Ross. Ross reached out and shook his hand. He recognized this person as the future leader of the Fantastic Four, known as one of the smartest people on Earth. Reed Richards. In the original timeline, soon Reed and his party will be irradiated in space, and the body structure will be mutated to produce various super abilities, creating their own legend. But up to now, the Fantastic Four is just an impression in Ross's mind. The relationship between Reed and his ex-girlfriend Susan has not recovered, so as soon as she saw him approaching, Susan shut her mouth and stopped talking. But she didn't leave either, and stood side by side with Pepper, who had been silent and haggard, listening to the conversation between the two of Ross. I read your thesis, and the argument about human body strengthening is indeed very rigorous and precise. I tried to reason it myself, and found that the conclusion is basically logical, but you don't seem to have considered ethical issues. Evolution will bring a series of problems that need to be solved. The trouble isn't just physical enhancement. Reed entered into an academic discussion state as soon as they met. Ross raised his eyebrows. He didn't know whether the other party was born this way, or forced himself into this state to deliberately ignore the existence of his ex-girlfriend. But no matter which one, it shows that he is not an interesting person to talk to. To get a pleasant person like Susan can only show that Reed is lucky enough. Although Ross is not very willing to discuss academic issues with others at this time, but since it is mentioned, it can only be chatted. If you put the phenomenon in a transparent bottle for one-sided observation, it will indeed cause a lot of troubles. But when it is substituted into reality, the world originally keeps creating troubles and solving troubles at the same time. Just like biology textbooks often mention as an example, the phenomenon of light-colored birch moth adults changing from more to less in the Manchester area of the United Kingdom can explain everything. The light-colored moths that are suitable for natural environment evolution are replaced by dark-colored moths that are more suitable for survival in environmental pollution backgrounds. This shows that not only organisms are changing, but also the environment and the world originally are changing. I believe that the problems we worry about are not serious, and the changing society can originally absorb these factors. The two discussed this. Ross's argument was mainly to pave the way for future products. He didn't plan to create a potion that could really make people have super strength, but it was difficult for Reed to understand the mood of entrepreneurs. He insisted that breaking the balance was abnormal. Bad thing. In the end, neither of them convinced the other. Ross didn't want to waste his efforts on a stubborn old man, and Reed couldn't overwhelm his junior with his knowledge, so their first meeting ended in an anticlimactic argument. Maybe it's what you think, but it depends on how drastic the change is. I still believe that a mutated individual will cause a lot of inconvenience to myself and my neighbors. At this time, Reed definitely didn't expect that he would soon become a rubber people, so he just raised his glass, and the two saluted each other and said goodbye. Suzanne and Pepper next to her were so stunned that they almost lost the manners that ladies should have. It is not that they have received advanced education, but a lot of terms and examples are as incomprehensible as a Bible to laymen, so from beginning to end after listening to it, they only left the impression of excellent and completely incomprehensible, maybe even a little more emotionally. Seeing the discussion between the two, Pepper undoubtedly thought of Stark, and Susan raised her opinion of Ross. Even her current boyfriend couldn't resist Reed's point of view for so long. Since college, Reed has been a top student, the nightmare of all academic competitors. Today, he finally met his match. With this impression, Susan looked at Ross again and felt differently about it the moment. Ross's clothing style is simple yet elegant, with a well-proportioned and slender figure. Although the muscles cannot be seen through the clothes, it is by no means a bit weak like Reed's. The delicate skin on his face is carved out of marble. There is an unfathomable mystery in the depth of a pair of pupils. Even Ms. Storm, who comes from the upper class and has seen many big shots, finds this temperament inconceivable. For a moment, she almost thinks that Ross is a noble prince strolling on the back of a pure white horse, while Reed is just standing on the road. A disgraced country farmer, even his boyfriend Victor seems too frivolous and arrogant compared to him. Taking advantage of the moment of confusion, Pepper dragged Susan away with his backhand. Thank God. After finally sending these people away, Ross relaxed, and then he felt someone approaching from behind, and when he turned around, he suddenly saw a person he absolutely didn't want to see here. MJ? He exclaimed in surprise. If I remember correctly, this lady should stay in a safe lab, protected by Sabretooth and the doctor. But he was not mistaken. The girl somehow tricked the dumbfounded Victor into slipping into the square by herself. Mary Jane smiled like a flower, wearing a costume that looked like a medieval noble lady. Her proud twin peaks were wrapped in bright red, and her whole body exuded a hot and spicy atmosphere that was completely opposite to that of Autumn. I was invited by the organizer. They heard about us and gave me a chance to perform. Isn't it a surprise? The girl spun her body triumphantly, her red skirt fluttering up. Ross was really pleasantly surprised. Now he found himself having to think about changing his plans. Ross, Victor just came back alone. Mary Jane? The doctor's hasty voice came through the headset, and Ross interrupted him. I know, she's right next to me now. He pursed his lips, giving a rare hesitation before giving the order. Send Todd over here. Toad was supposed to provide him with backup in times of danger, and now Ross needs him to provide protection for another. Recall Toad? The doctor jumped up from his chair in shock, forgetting Toad's name. Protect Mary Jane? Don't worry, I can handle them, Ross whispered with his arms around his girlfriend's waist. You're crazy, growled the doctor. You forgot that Norman has a whole team of ability enhancers. The drug storage system in Osborn's clinical laboratory shows that all the physical strength enhancers have been used up, calculated by the number of people he hired. If some people were not extraordinarily gifted, that is, Norman used more than one for himself. I understand everything, but please do as I say. Ross tried to reassure Connors and calm him down. Trust me, they won't be trouble, I promise. He comforted him several times. Connors muttered a few times in the earphone and finally stopped talking. But that doesn't mean the doctor approves of Ross' decision. It's just that the long-awaited goal has finally appeared. The iconic strange smile flashed across the sky, and then Green Goblin, who stepped on the glider, appeared in front of the world with a domineering posture in the eyes of everyone. 030. The moment Green Goblin rushed into the square from above the forest on a hang glider, people looked up at him with astonished expressions. They had just recognized the identity of the person, and violent vibrations came from the edge of the square one after another with the roar of the explosion. Turning his head subconsciously, he found that the temporary police booth not far away exploded, and the blazing flames rushed out of this small building in all directions with blazing hot air waves, involving passers-by who had no time to escape. They were so burned that they burst into flames and wailed terribly. The blown roof fell to the ground, the masonry walls collapsed, and the shattered glass splashed. Nearly 10,000 citizens present were terrified by the sudden attack and fell into extreme panic like an ant nest that had been poured with boiling water. At the moment, if you look down from the sky above the square, you can see the whole process of the crowd from stillness to turmoil. The running people spread from the inside to the outside like a wave. The people in front are desperately trying to stay away from the direction of the explosion. The people tried their best to push their companions who were blocking the way, scrambling to escape to the exit of the park and a safe direction. Some daring people took out their mobile phones to call the 911 hotline while trotting with their heads down, or barely kept their balance under the push of others, and raised their cameras to shoot and record videos of the Green Goblin who was showing off his might. During the panic, the crowd lost order. The explosion that happened at the corner of the square originally did not cause too many casualties. Instead, the scattered crowd stomped on each other when they fled, resulting in many injuries. Fortunately, the police officers patrolling nearby at the moment have hurried away. Then, they began to try to control the situation. Call for backup, Someone jumped into the police car and picked up the walkie-talkie and shouted, "Everyone aim at the guy up there. Shoot." Other officers set their sights on the circling Green Goblin. Before the people who called for support got a reply, the police who were ready to shoot pulled the trigger, and the mercenaries under Green Goblin stepped into the battlefield brazenly. Boom, boom, boom. Several rifle grenades were fired at the police position at the same time, and most of the police officers had no time to dodge. The eye-catching flames had already enveloped the area, and the dazzling light flashed in an instant. The shockwave swept out to the surroundings, and the fireball formed by the explosion was filled with a large number of steel ball fragments. Flying with an astonishing momentum, the already panicked crowd immediately ran wildly like a herd of beasts who had been severely whipped after this intimidation. Fortunately, at the moment Mary Jane was protected by Toad, who arrived in time, out of danger. She followed Toad to retreat to an area where the crowd was relatively sparse, while frequently looking back for Ross, who had been washed away by a large number of fugitives not long ago. Ross was definitely much safer than she had feared. He stalked through the crowd to observe Norman's movements while quietly approaching the Green Goblin mercenaries. Keep your distance, don't get too close to the crowd, and don't disperse too much. The mercenary Captain Thor is a South American in his 30s. Dark-skinned hybrid features can be seen on the muscular arms. Sent a group of team members into the forest to protect the retreat, and another group searched for hostages in nearby buildings. S.H.I.E.L.D. took the rest of his men and stood in a row with flat-ended guns and fired at the scattered crowd, driving the crowd to other directions. They didn't kill them on purpose, but to create a larger-scale chaos so that the employer could complete the goal as soon as possible. Start the timer and report every 60 seconds. After glancing at the chaos in the square, S.H.I.E.L.D. ordered that they had an agreement with their employer in advance to keep the offensive for only 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, every additional in 1 minute, the commission will increase by 2 million, and the cumulative increase will be 5 times. That is, Norman will have 5 to 10 minutes to kill his business opponent, so that he can have enough time to evacuate calmly afterwards. After all, this is New York and Manhattan. Attacks are happening in the heart of the city. Even these bloody lunatics who are used to risking their lives for drug lords and warlords have to act cautiously. If it is not the identity of the employer, it can bring a lot of convenience, and proposed an irresistible reward. The captain would never consider doing such a thing in a downtown area during the day. You must know that after a series of incidents such as Liberty Island, the New York police has greatly strengthened the investment in city security and special police forces. Up to now, the local police station has employed 50,000 police officers, and an average of more than 1,000 well-trained special police officers are arrested every day. Assigned to participate in various special missions, this small mercenary group can persist for 10 minutes is the limit. After this time, the police who react will surround the entire Central Park at any time, so that even the mercenaries who have been strengthened can't believe it. The employer's guarantee must be escaped. In the final analysis, accepting strengthening is not to live a better life. So how can one die so easily? With such a mentality, the mercenaries put more attention on ensuring their own safety, and if they found something wrong, they all evacuated through the woods. While the shooter was not paying attention, a policeman who was shot in the abdomen endured unspeakable pain and slowly crawled towards the only police car with little damage, dragging a long trail of blood, and quietly took a police car out of the cab. An M4 assault rifle. The gun was supposed to have been used by the only friend among his colleagues who had a license to use a rifle, but that friend had already been killed in the first round of attacks. "Bless me, guys, it's up to you now, Bull." The police officer took a few breaths, murmured his name, raised his gun with difficulty, aimed at the target from a distance, and before he could shoot, the other party suddenly he turned around vigilantly to avoid it, and then rushed over at an inhuman speed under his unbelievable eyes, threw a knife halfway and knocked down the rifle, and then forcibly pulled down the car door with one hand, and reached into the police car. Ball, who weighed more than 190 pounds, was swung 10 feet away from the cab and fell heavily to the ground. After spitting out a few mouthfuls of blood, almost all the bones in Boar's body were shattered. Only now did he realize that his opponent was not an ordinary person. The troops should be sent from above. The thought flashed through Boar's mind, and his eyes went black for a while. "It's so courageous." Soder looked down at the policeman, but he was quite pleasantly surprised. He was getting older, and his physical fitness had begun to decline. He used to spend a lot of money and had no savings. In recent years, he has been worried that life will be difficult in the future. So this time he took the risk to accept the reward, but he didn't expect Green Goblin's potion to be extraordinary. He already felt that he was quite different from before, and it was so easy to do such a drastic action. You can't escape. Bull was foaming from his mouth, and it seemed that he would not survive, but his words angered Thor. The mercenary captain bent down and grabbed his hair forcefully, lifting half of his body, and then picked up the knife he threw from the ground. Pole's last impression was of a dark military knife being wiped at his throat, and he lost consciousness completely after a burst of cutting pain and suffocation. Throwing down the head in his hand, Thor ruthlessly wiped the blood in his hand on the policeman's body, and then looked to the high platform of the square, where his employer was performing the final performance. I'm out, am I? Amidst the chaos, Green Goblin circled an area where the high-level New York business community gathered. Although there were hundreds of people here, they were all stunned, even though they were everywhere outside. The fleeing crowd, but no one here dared to leave secretly, and would just stand there like a puppet, as if time had stopped here, forming a strong contrast with the surroundings. Taking advantage of the panic below, Green Goblin stepped on the hang glider suddenly, floated sideways into the crowd, leaned over and picked up a bald old man in a wheelchair. Didn't expect today, Feege. Flying into the air, Green Goblin pinched the other party's neck and laughed strangely. Ever since the Ministry of National Defense deliberately inclined to explore the aerospace company, he has been under pressure from inside and outside the company. They all tried to sell Norman's hard work and seek the best interests for themselves. Now this pressure finally found a vent, and he vowed to tear all these guys who opposed him to pieces. You're Norman? Feige was reminded of the familiar voice so close, and he trembled. That's right, old man. This is greetings from Osborn, and I have a gift for you that you will never forget. Green Goblin grinned, strangled Feege with one hand, and punched him violently with the other. A punch landed on the opponent. Even if it was dozens of feet above the ground, the people below could clearly hear the bones breaking. The sound of beeping and beeping continued to explode, as if a monster was gnawing on the bone marrow in the sky, and they were so frightened that their bodies were limp and their legs were trembling. Blood and flesh flew in midair, but Green Goblin's interest was far from over. After throwing away Feige's distorted corpse, he swooped down again and brought up another shareholder, Balkan. Ross watched Fig fall to the ground from a distance. Balkan was mentioned by Green Goblin, and he knew it was finally his turn to act. Pushing aside those who stood in his way, Ross headed deep into the woods, where a team of Green Goblin mercenaries guarded the retreat. The deeper you go into the woods, the dimmer the light inside. At the moment has not cooled down significantly, and there are still many leaves on the trees in New York. They block the sunlight layer by layer, and also hide the crimes happening below. Susan swears that she has never encountered such a desperate situation in her life. When Green Goblin just hit, she was pulling her friend Pepper in a place where no one would disturb her, trying to persuade her to leave Stark and join her boyfriend Doom's company. Unexpectedly, as soon as she heard the explosion and turned her head, the situation changed drastically. The good parade turned into a massacre, and the park square became more chaotic than the Central Asian battlefield. Give his two bodyguards a detour through the woods. This idea is good at first, but there is a problem. That is, their luck is really bad enough. Although they avoided the chaotic crowd and the shooting gunmen, they were very unfortunate to bump into the mercenary detachment guarding the retreat. The members are all from the war-torn South America, and they did all sorts of crimes there. After they came to New York, they were held back by Norman for many days. Now that they saw beautiful women delivered to their door, how could they bear it anymore, and immediately rushed towards them. Dumb's bodyguards were recruited by him with a lot of money. Although they are not the top experts in the world, they are all elite members of the Marine Corps. Susan knows how tough these bodyguards are usually, but after encountering strengthening soldiers, they have absolutely no strength to fight back. Plop! A corpse with a broken neck fell down, and South American mercenaries with strange smiles surrounded them. Susan, run! Pepper yelled sharply, pushing Susan away, picking up a wooden stick and throwing it at the other party. Susan, who turned to run away, soon heard Pepper scream and the sound of clothes being torn. Pepper! She ran out of breath. Her face was full of tears, but she didn't dare to stop. The panting of the two men behind followed her closely like the howling of hungry wolves. Just as he was about to rush out of the woods, a hand was placed on her shoulder, dragging her back. Don't! Susan screamed and fell to the ground, and two men held her hands and feet respectively. Susan couldn't hear what the two South Americans said in Spanish. With blurred eyes, she saw a figure walking towards her. Help! Susan called for help with all her strength, but after the bodyguards were killed at will, she no longer had much hope in her heart. Especially when she recognized the other party as Ross, She couldn't believe that this big boy could save herself from the supervillain. No. With her mouth covered, Susan looked desperately at a South American thug with fierce eyes walking towards Ross. Through the tears she tried to look there, trying to tell the boy with her eyes, "Don't come over. Turn around and run away immediately." At this moment, Ross's expression was unexpectedly indifferent, almost as calm and relaxed as a lion king patrolling his territory, defiantly. The thought flashed through Susan's mind as she watched the mercenary grab young Ross' neck. "Boy, you." The words didn't finish. Boom. The next moment, the sturdy South American was thrown into the air. His body seemed to be hit by a medieval siege hammer. A gust of hurricane swept past Susan's body and crashed straight into the big tree behind him. The trunk trembled violently, and countless pale yellow leaves slowly fell from the sky. Through the gaps exposed by the branches, the long-lost warm sunlight finally fell, and countless light spots illuminated the dim shade. Susan will never forget this moment, as if she was carried back to heaven by the holy angel from the depths of the devil's rampant, filthy hell. The other burly man was stunned. He didn't care about putting on the clothes he had just taken off halfway, let go of the woman and jumped up hastily before he could pick up the weapon. Ross had already come to him leisurely, raised his hand to hold him down just like that. He dragged the strengthened super mercenary towards the still trembling tree. In front are mercenaries leaning against a tree to lose their breath. Ka. Ross' hands were stronger than steel. The strong man struggled and made a strange panting sound from his throat. Suddenly his body lightened, and Ross grabbed his head and lifted him up. Puff! With a soft sound, the heads of the two South Americans hit each other heavily, and the dark red blood and white brains were scattered all over the tree trunk. Susan stared blankly at the two corpses lying loose on the ground. Her body felt a biting cold, followed by an indescribable heat that lingered. Ross took off his coat and threw it on Susan. "Follow me." A flat voice echoed in the woods. 031. As time passed, the mercenary Captain Thor gradually became a little anxious. He has experienced many battles, but most of them used force in slums or jungle areas, and his employers or opponents are basically warlords and drug lords. As long as he wins, he doesn't have to worry about being held accountable afterwards. This time the action was completely different from the previous ones. His men blatantly created huge disturbances in the center of the city and opened fire on unarmed New York citizens with various light and heavy weapons. To put it bluntly, this was a declaration of war on a country. Without having to think about it, a normal person can realize how big the risk is with instinct. The heavily armed police or the National Guard must be on their way at full speed at this moment, but Norman Osborn, the employer who turned into Green Goblin, seems to have lost his mind. Like a sane lunatic dragging people up and down in midair. Does he think he is an Andean vulture keen to eat carrion? Since he wants to kill people, why can't he do it more simply? Solve the trouble quickly, and then everyone go back and split the money. Although he was full of dissatisfaction, he just licked Tion's dry lips and didn't show his emotions. That's right, Thor didn't finish middle school in his turbulent Colombian hometown, but he, who has been in society for a long time, knows very well what kind of demonstration effect a team leader will bring to his subordinates if he is not firm. In order to avoid disaster happened, he must remain calm. Turning sideways to look at the high platform, Green Goblin, who had just thrown down the corpse like a tattered water bag, grabbed a silver-haired entrepreneur in the blink of an eye. Thor didn't know that the hapless ghost who was screaming desperately was Chew. As one of the top executives in aerospace, he is not interested in the personal grievances of his employer at all, as long as he knows that Green Goblin's hunting operation will not end for the time being. "Give me the phone," he said with a sullen face, and ordered the short man next to him who was shooting happily. That man didn't know how to restrain himself like his regiment leader, and he was holding the M134 that was heavy before with a frantic expression. The model Gatling rapid-fire machine gun fired aimlessly in all directions, and he didn't recover until he was kicked heavily by Thor, who was so angry. "Don't give me all the bullets. The boss said that there might be another guy who will appear. That is a very difficult enemy. You can concentrate on me? Do you hear me?" While reprimanding severely, Thor dialed on the phone. He has an acquaintance who is good at sniping and was also hired by Norman. He is now ambushing on 97th Street, waiting for the target to show up and then kill him with one shot. Don't know what's going on with him. According to the contract, if they can't succeed in one blow, the mercenary group also needs to kill the transforming scientist for the employer in order to get the final payment smoothly. Spider-Men flying high and high, black shadows that appear and disappear like lightning, Scientists who can transform into lizards or dinosaurs, these weird things are only produced here, and Thor had never heard of them in his hometown in South America before. But when he himself stepped into the realm of superhumans, there seemed to be nothing to doubt. No matter what, as long as you can get away successfully afterwards, it doesn't matter even if you get a little less money. The mercenaries from the chaotic land knew very well what it meant to them to have power. Although Thor looked cold on the outside, he sometimes couldn't help himself like a young man in his heart. He fantasized about the wonderful life he could live after going back. The phone was dialed out, but there was no reply, and Thor's heart sank slightly. He dialed twice more, but there was still no result, so he completely gave up his luck, squeezed the temporary disposable mobile phone to pieces, and then rang the walkie-talkie in his team. "Attention all units, report the situation now," he yelled, but in the channel, only the team members who were sent to drive away the citizens were replying, while the mercenaries guarding the only escape route were silent as if they had disappeared. "Oops," Thor cursed secretly, and quickly turned his head to call Green Goblin, but found that the other side was still obsessed with killing Pokes and ignored him, so he didn't care about recalling the peripheral members and directly led all his capable men out of the position, killing aggressively to the depths of the woods. In the woods near Bethesda Square, there is an old building that has been in disrepair. It has been rarely visited by people, but today it was suddenly disturbed by people coming one after another. This is an entrance to the underground world. I am afraid that most people living in New York do not know what is under their feet. Most of the pipelines that maintain the lives of citizens are buried in the soil from the ground to 30 feet underground. Network. From there down to 200 feet, you can see part of the subway passage and water supply pipe network, and this level is still not the end of the underground world. Below it, there is a vast space as deep as 800 feet. Here is the deepest construction site in New York. The construction site of the new pipeline plan. Ordinary people may not imagine that if they want to dig a deep hole in New York City today, then he needs a detailed drawing, because any infrastructure he dug up may be more than 100 years old. Knocking out a brick, the entire pipeline could collapse, costing millions of dollars. Therefore, the charts in the hands of New York municipal engineers are like confidential documents and cultural relics. They are kept in a special place and are difficult for outsiders to access. However, Norman Osborn showed this confidential map to his mercenaries, and only he can carry it. The men escaped safely from police grasp. Thor had personally investigated this route, so he believed in Norman's promise, and now he must do his best to fight a way out for his people. A group of people rushed to the vicinity of the entrance building with weapons in hand. The first thing they saw was bloody corpses on the ground. Before Thor ordered a search, something happened that made their eyes tear apart. Amidst the loud noise, a person who stayed behind the mercenary was forcibly kicked out, smashed through the main entrance of the building, spit out a large amount of blood in midair, rolled and landed in front of Thor's feet. Without saying anything, Thor immediately waved his hand and gave the order to fire. The metal storm erupted from the muzzles of multiple guns, tearing apart the entire wall on the front of the building in an instant. The wall, which was originally said to be strong, was struck by the bullets like a hornet's nest under the impact of modern weapons made by humans. Thousands of holes were drilled in the body, and then it turned into a pile of scattered sand and stones and collapsed. Smoke and dust filled the surroundings, bullets pierced the air and fell into the building. A series of dim sparks erupted in the dark blood stains were covered by burnt ashes. A dozen mercenaries were choked and coughed and had to be separated, covering his mouth and nose with a hand. Until then, Thor waved his hand to stop. All he could see now were dilapidated houses, smoking wooden trim, and the wreckage of doors and windows that had been blasted by the blast. Flames blazed from the burning roof, and the high temperature baked the melted cables behind the ceiling. The pungent and thick plastic smell radiated from above, and electric sparks traveled around and spread from the short-circuited metal wires. However, Thor's target was not found. The unknown opponent, who should have been beaten into meat paste, did not stand behind the door as he thought. There were only corpses of mercenaries pressed by the collapsed wall, and they fell to the ground one by one. Most of the expressions are as peaceful as sleeping. It can be seen that these strengthening companions did not realize the opponent's appearance until they died. The audience was dead silent, only the sound of crackling and burning wood. The mercenary captain took a few rough, heavy breaths, turned his head to the side of his subordinates, and motioned for the two people to get in slowly to check to see if the target had slipped into the underground passage. This order was very unpopular, but it had to be carried out. Just when the two subordinates were about to go out, a strange boy strolled in from outside. "Everyone had a great time. Can I participate?" Ross approached with a smile, as relaxed and natural as if he was taking a walk with his girlfriend in the countryside. Through the button camera on his chest, Connors could see the astonished expressions of the mercenaries on the opposite side. "Don't be too careless, these are high-priced recruits from Norman," he warned quietly in the headset, but he was not as panicked as when he first knew that Ross was going to act alone. After seeing Ross's skills again, he recalled how terrifying this companion was. Before the doctor transformed, he was often awakened by those deep and indifferent eyes in his sleep, but as the cooperation between the two parties gradually deepened, and there was no need to coerce and subdue each other, Ross quietly withdrew his own light and changed to A with an intimate and friendly attitude. The doctor often has a wonderful illusion, thinking that this young man who is full of mysteries is really his junior. It wasn't until just now that he woke up from this illusion, remembering that the joint attack of Spider-Man and Green Goblin, which made him at a loss, was also easily resolved by this junior. Too much to worry about. Connors laughed at himself, wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, and was startled suddenly, only then realized that he was firmly tied to Ross' chariot. Not to mention the doctor's emotion, the appearance of Ross awakened the mercenaries who were about to go mad. Although they were too close to fire, the nearest person had already jumped towards him after being transformed. These people basically have the physique of Superman, fighting on the line of life and death all year round, so that the mercenaries, regardless of their height, have strong muscles covered with tattoos and scars, more violent than the original Green Goblin that appeared on the road. The first person who rushed to Ross was the short man who was reprimanded by Thor. He was said to be short, but he was actually compared to the tall captain. In fact, the original was more than 5 feet tall. The hand was a ferocious uppercut that hit Ross' heart. Ross smiled unchanged and greeted the short mercenary's fist, and then the two fists collided undisguisedly. There was a muffled sound, blood splattered, and the sharp-eyed mercenary could almost see the flesh on the back of the short man's fist, and the sharp bones of Byzantium pierced the skin and protruded little by little, and the owner of the fist didn't even have time to cry out in pain. At the moment his feet were lifted off the ground by the recoil and he flew backwards, Ross pushed him towards his companion with lightning speed. In an instant, everyone's thinking seemed to freeze. The shouts of shock were still brewing in their throats, and Ross, who still had a faint smile on his face, had already passed by. In the woods behind him, 2 naked women hugged each other and half knelt in a lush bush. Through the gaps in the thick leaves, they stared dumbfounded at the gentle and wise boy in their hearts, turning into a free light. The wind calmly passed through more than a dozen armed thugs with terrified faces. Susan was trembling all over, holding Pepper's arm tightly. Miss Storm was born in a high-class society and lived a superior life since she was a child. She was loved by her family like a noble princess. As an adult, because of her beauty and intelligence, the men around her respect her very much, no matter if they are dull and shrewd. Although the only younger brother is playful, he seldom disobeys her orders. Because of this, what happened today was something she had never imagined in her life, and she was shocked from the bottom of her heart like never before, and the chills formed by waves of fear wrapped around her body, making her whole body stiff, couldn't even utter a complete sentence. Countless times, she wanted to escape from the woods and return to normal society while others were not paying attention, but Ross's floating figure radiated bright light like the sun, which firmly attracted her eyes and made her unable to move away. His eyes followed that mysterious person wholeheartedly. Her hands became tighter and tighter, and Pepper was almost out of breath by Susan's hug, but she didn't say anything, just stared ahead silently. The gunfire rang out again. This time it didn't last long. Ross had already accumulated enough knowledge of these ability enhancers, and now in his eyes, these people were no different from ordinary people. Grabbing a pistol casually, Ross walked towards the person in front of him. No matter how the other party dodged and evaded, it was useless. The muzzle of the gun reached the edge of the person's brow bone like a death god, and then the flames flashed. Boom, the eye socket burst. The bullet passed through the weak eyeball and shot into the brain, and then was blocked by the strong bone after strengthening, and the refracted metal particles rolled wildly in the skull, turning the entire brain tissue into a boiling thick porridge in a very short period of time. Without paying any more attention, Ross continued to look for the next opponent. His movements looked soothing and graceful, as if he was dancing to a certain rhythm, but at the same time, he was as precise and punctual as the most sophisticated machinery. Take a life. Under the constant shooting, the mercenaries shouted frantically in Spanish with various accents. Some turned and ran away, some fell to their knees, and some tried to fight back, but no matter what choices they made, the final fate was inevitable. It's the same, these strengthening thugs who opened fire on the citizens arrogantly in the square and rushed into the woods aggressively to shoot wildly, fell to the ground like clumsy statues in front of Ross, and Ross always smiled lightly and said nothing. The battle was over when the blue smoke rose in the air and the smell of gunpowder faintly spread around. At the moment, only the mercenary leader Thor was still alive. He lost his usual calm and solemnity, and his distraught and distorted face was filled with horror, and he stumbled towards the edge of the woods. 032. Hovering above the square, Green Goblin has never felt so happy in his heart. On this day, he not only got rid of the major shareholder of the board of directors who had been against him for a long time, but also eliminated the executives of exploration and aerospace who were deliberately trying to annex the company. It is a very unique experience to crush the bones of these annoying ghosts with his own hands again and again. The accompanying crackling sound and heart-piercing wailing for mercy are like a cheerful serenade in his ears, melodious, and the beautiful sound made him completely indulge in this supreme enjoyment. Gradually, he began to feel that something wonderful in his heart was being released quietly. This feeling is dark, cold, and powerful. When it first appeared, it roared like dark clouds all over the sky, swallowing most of the rational brilliance belonging to human beings. In a trance, scenes of past experiences flashed before Norman's eyes. From today onwards, Osborne Industries surpassed Exploration and Aerospace Corporation and officially became the second largest supplier to the U.S. military. From now on, only Stark Industries stands in front of us. That is to say, all directors, cost reduction, and profit increase. And Osborne's share price is at an all-time high. A man sat alone in a conference room with a happy face and gave a speech. The opposite of him was pitch black, and countless shadows whispered in the dimness, making disturbing noises. Then an indifferent voice sounded from afar. In that case, we can just sell the company for a good price. So Norman, you are out? The hateful voice kept echoing in his ears, forcing Norman to hug his head tightly. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! He screamed loudly, barely suppressed it for a moment, then couldn't control the rage in his heart any longer, turned around and rushed down, sneaked into the crowd on the high platform like a madman. From the first trial of potions, Norman was an existence above ordinary people. After suffering setbacks on the road, he used enhancers many times in order to strengthen himself. The current Green Goblin is far stronger than before, just for a short period of time. The following has suffered heavy casualties. The aimless killing caused the crowd, who were still thinking of luck, to flee in all directions, while Norman jumped on the hang glider and fired recklessly after him, until he accidentally saw a familiar young man holding a blood-stained towel. His shoulders fell to the ground before he regained his sobriety. It was his son Harry, and Harry stared at his father with puzzled and terrified eyes, as if he had already guessed something, but looked extremely strange. At this moment, Norman stared at Harry blankly, as if he had lost something important. After a moment of trance, Harry was forcibly dragged away from the gun. Idiot! Norman didn't know who he was talking about. He took a last look at his son's back and stepped on the hang glider into the air. The field of vision gradually expanded, and with every foot of height, Norman's mind flooded with memories. These memories are all complicated past events that he had forgotten a long time ago. Today's industrial giant, he has given up too many things. There was no mercy in the mall, only his son was his last concern. And now that Harry had left, he no longer had any nostalgia in his heart and became extremely cruel and indifferent. In this silent and colorless metamorphosis, the darkness lurking in his heart continued to grow, and the intoxicating powerful force quietly expanded, making him unable to extricate himself like taking drugs. When Norman was immersed in the depraved happiness, the darkness finally completely dominated his body and mind. From this moment on, Norman's personality disappears and is replaced by Green Goblin. The old dogs like Feige and Balkan have been killed. Connors is under the care of snipers, and now only Ross is left who doesn't know where to go. Green Goblin turned slowly, staring at the fleeing crowd coldly, with all his heart find the final goal. While he was looking around, a call with a South American accent came from the headset. Boss, I found the person you want. He is near the underground passage. Very well, wait for me. Green Goblin showed a weird smile, turned off the earphones, turned and flew deep into the woods. Soon he crossed the golden treetops that were dyed yellow by layers of autumn leaves, and came to the smoking building in the forest. There, the mercenary captain stood in front of him with his head bowed. Look at you, Thor. I have paid so much for you, and you really let me down. slowly descending from the sky. Green Goblin looked down at each other from above. Although he is dissatisfied with his mouth, he is actually quite happy in his heart. These days, Green Goblin has been worried about the shadow on the highway that knocked him and Spider-Man back together. If so, he probably won't sit idly by. Assuming the mercenaries managed to capture Ross today without losing anything, he'd be paranoid. But now that these guys have suffered heavy casualties, Green Goblin guesses that the opponent may have been dealt with, or at least successfully repelled. After all, there are dozens of well-trained ability enhancers here, and they are fully armed. It is not too surprising for Green Goblin to be able to do this, otherwise why promise such a high reward? Now, maybe it's time to get rid of those one-off tools too. With a strange smile, Green Goblin jumped off the hang glider and walked up to Thor. Just as he was about to speak, his eyes suddenly fixed. Almost at the same time, a dagger passed through the back of Thor's head soundlessly, and the icy blade protruded from the front, stabbing him head-on like a poisonous snake. Through the gaps in the leaves, a miniature drone faithfully sent this scene back to the cutting-edge laboratory. Beautiful. Dr. Connors slapped the operating table hard and couldn't help screaming at the moment he was finally relieved. I said earlier that he's fine. Juggernaut Coin Marcoon next to him interjected angrily. He had just dealt with the sniper outside, and now he was relaxed, and he just happened to watch Ross's battle together. Looking sideways at Connor's agitated appearance, Ross' cousin in name had a bit of contempt for the old man. He knew all too well about Ross, the cousin whose gear was inspired by the great Juggernaut and definitely equally strong, solid, and unstoppable. Maybe the old man with glasses pays too much attention to the external form and not so much on the internal, so he ignores the growth of Ross, but Juggernaut does not. He had seen with his own eyes how Ross had grown from a mortal who could only stand by his side with equipment to where he is today. In Juggernaut's view, Ross's equipment is not so much a combat suit as an extension of his body, a living thing. Through its function, Ross's essence is constantly changing. Every day he is stronger than the day before, but the old man Connors never pays attention to these things. He only knows to take some instruments to measure outside, get a basic data, and think he has figured it out from now on. In fact, he doesn't understand the human body at all potential. Even Juggernaut wasn't that strong in the beginning, so he was more receptive to Ross' growth than Connors. Connors didn't know what Juggernaut was thinking, but he also saw things he hadn't noticed before. Without the aid of equipment, Ross at the moment can also complete this difficult assassination action with ease. This iron proof proves how fruitful their research work is. Connors looked at the screen and recalled the speech Ross had given secretly in the lab. We all know that half of a person's genes come from the father and half from the mother. In fact, this statement is not accurate. If the DNA in the fertilized egg is divided into 100 copies, then there are only 98 copies in the nucleus, and half of them come from the parents. But in addition, there are 2 copies of DNA in the mitochondria outside the nucleus. Through their control, the mitochondria charge the host like a high-efficiency battery and promote the evolution of the host cell to a more complex direction. These 2 copies of DNA are called mitochondrial DNA. They're all inherited from the mother. If the mother's mitochondrial DNA mutates, the next generation will be born with mitochondrial disease. This asymmetry is called the mother's curse. In order to treat this curse, scientists once had an idea. Trying to get rid of this problem can be completely solved by extracting unmutated mitochondrial DNA from healthy third-party bodies. And we can use this principle to graft some of the characteristics of mutant onto ordinary people by picking mutant genes, making us with new powers. Connors has always been skeptical about this. This method is essentially a genetically modified project. Ross's whimsy is equivalent to creating a 3-parent lineage, 1 father, 2 mothers, and one of the mother's mutant genes provides the recipient power that ordinary people do not have. That's right, it's this kind of power. He actually realized it. Connors admired, and finally remembered Juggernaut next to him. He looked back at the other party, and saw Juggernaut inexplicably. The doctor now remembered that this Titan-like man was one of the main sources of DNA, and his power was not only copied into equipment, but also partially transferred to the human body. From this point of view, Green Goblin has Osborn's enhancement potion, and Ross has achieved rich results along his own direction. In front of him, Green Goblin's ability enhancer is simply vulnerable, and this kind of progress is just the beginning. In time, even a top company like Stark will bow down in front of a laboratory with cutting-edge technology. Through the screen, the doctor seemed to see a mysterious door open to him, and he couldn't help but start looking forward to the bright future. As Ross said, that day will surely come. From then on, he believed in Ross' prophecy. Not to mention Connor's longing. The battle in the woods has entered the most intense state from the very beginning. After the complete transformation, Green Goblin's strength has greatly increased. If compared with the original form during the road attack, his current combat power is several times greater than the original one. It was Connors who had the upper hand that time, and Green Goblin escaped with the help of Spider-Man. But if Connors also becomes Dr. Lizard to fight against his old opponent, it won't be long before Green Goblin he was beaten badly. It's a pity that Green Goblin's opponent is not Connors, but another person who has also evolved. Caught off guard, the dagger plunged deep into Green Goblin's right shoulder, the blade slicing through the tendon and the point exiting the back. Ross, at this moment, he saw the true face of his opponent, and without being surprised, he picked up a pumpkin bomb from the back of his waist with his backhand and threw it at Ross. The distance between the two was very close. Only Thor's corpse was separated between them. In order to regain the lost initiative, Green Goblin could only use the corpse as a shield for a risky attack. Regrettably, the bomb hadn't detonated yet. 2 fingers lightly touched the round sphere and pushed it far away into the woods behind. Hot and bright flames gushed out, and the turbulent air waves it smashed the surrounding bushes to pieces, but failed to do any damage to Ross. Riding on this momentum, Ross pushed the dagger forward until he pinned Green Goblin to the thick tree trunk. Under such a violent impact, Green Goblin seemed to be pushed and flew backwards. His feet were off the ground, and he couldn't use his strength. His shoulders were pierced, and he couldn't escape. His back hit the tree trunk heavily before he suddenly stopped. It doesn't have to be an earth-shattering one, but one slack was enough for Ross to seal the win. Green Goblin was not willing to admit defeat, and grabbed the opponent's throat violently with the power of the back shock. But as soon as he stretched his hand halfway, his body shook, and the dagger that pierced his shoulder was pulled out by Ross, and it was nailed into his forehead with his backhand. "Goodbye, Norman." Ross closed his eyes softly and disappeared into the woods. 033. The autumn sunshine could not warm the cold air brought by the high pressure in North America, but instead plunged the huge seaside city of New York into a state of chill and anxiety. The scene of Green Goblin reappearing and massacring the parade crowd shocked everyone who sat in front of the TV and watched the program. How will it develop next? Can the trapped hostages be rescued from the butcher knife? The apprehension of the lunatics has become the topic of most concern to everyone at the moment. The voice of the public is the pressure of the police, so the senior officials of the New York Police Department are very clear that this time they have no way out. Director George sat on the helicopter and kept discussing with his colleagues how to assign tasks, how to prevent risks, how to deploy all forces, and use all resources at hand to achieve the goal. When the tense discussions came to an end and the responsibilities were assigned in turn, the helicopter they took finally arrived at the temporary landing site near Central Park. Ignoring the flickering lights in the distance and the shouts of protesters, George jumped to the ground first, briefly explained the order to the on-site commander and police officer, took a rifle from a nearby special service member, and looked back at the people behind him. His expression was unusually calm. As everyone must know, Mr. Shurchong has formally requested support from the federal government, and the best people in the country will come to help us soon. But until the high-level agents and military experts arrive, we can only rely on our own power. Today may be the last time I will talk to you as the Director General. Put aside the prejudices between each other in the past. I want to tell you, gentlemen, I am very honored to work with you. He nodded to his subordinates, and then walked into the ranks of the Secret Service team, determined to take risks with these brave young men like ordinary police officers. The colleagues looked at each other, and some high-level police officers who had not received specific tasks also joined the team of their superiors one after another. "George, you guy, how can you leave me at this time?" George's right-hand man complained behind him. They are old friends for many years. They joined the police force together after graduating from college. They also started as grassroots police officers in Queens. And later, they were promoted to the city bureau together, and they have been friends for decades. When he saw George's choice, he grabbed a rifle without thinking, and immediately stood beside his old friend with his chubby belly. "That's right, you're not the only one who needs to wash away your shame. I also want to uphold the honor of the New York police," another person said proudly with a cold face. "People need to be deeper, but it is only because they are not popular that they are defeated by George and relegated to the deputy position." The two had always been at odds in the past, but now this person has followed suit. Behind him, more police officers silently joined in. At this moment, all members of the police united closely with the chief, vowing to fight the villains in the park to the death. George pursed his lips, his eyes were slightly red. He didn't say anything, watching his subordinates put on body armor one by one like special service members, so he picked up one for himself. Before he put it on, a familiar voice from afar stopped him. "You shouldn't have come here, Gwen." George reprimanded his daughter, who ran all the way after hearing the news. "Put this on, Dad." Gwen blushed as she ran. Knowing her father's character, she didn't stop George from taking risks, but only handed him a few things. The latest products from the laboratory can protect yourself better than the old bulletproof vests you wear. George looked at these ultra-thin bulletproof vests that looked like transparent raincoats. He refused deliberately, but couldn't bear to hurt his daughter's heart. He could only accept one with a frown, and then handed the extra to his old friend. "No, I don't want to wear a raincoat to the battlefield. I'm afraid my wife will laugh when she sees it on TV." The old friend smiled and pushed him away, but the person who had a quarrel with George did not refuse. "Okay, get ready to act. As for Gwen, you go home right away." After everything was arranged, George let out a deep breath, turned around and set off with the team. The actions of the police did not hide from Ross's eyes. He stood on the treetop by the forest and watched for a while. After seeing George and his party in transparent bulletproof suits in the team, his eyes flickered, and then returned to the corpse at the underground entrance. At the moment, Green Goblin had just died. His muscles were still elastic and his blood was warm. Except for the dagger deeply pierced in his forehead, everything was still the same as before. It came sooner than expected. It seems that Mr. Bullseye doesn't have to appear in person. "Congratulations on saving your life," he said to himself, carefully took the dagger off the head of the corpse, and then made a face to Green Goblin. Some cover-ups were done to make it look like he was still alive. "Do me one more favor at the end? How about making things come to a happy ending?" Ross said softly. "People have not been strengthened, and all core members who have been strengthened have died here. Every decedent has marks of gunshot wounds or knife penetration, which looks very similar to Bullseye's method. It is conceivable that when the police come here to see all this, they will definitely think of the declaration of war issued by Bullseye not long ago, and they will think that this is a battle of revenge against Green Goblin by Bullseye. The Killer King used Green Goblin's actions to launch an attack, and then successfully paid and avenged his employer. Although this result is not perfect, it is a reason, and everyone must accept it. Except for poor Osborn and Exploration Aerospace. Although the management of the latter was wiped out, the members of the board of directors are still there, and should be able to continue to maintain it. However, Osborn's top management is completely dead, and he is also suspected of being a very disreputable criminal. The future is bound to be dark. Definitely, this is not necessarily a bad thing. At least Norman's son can be freed from his original fate. Harry didn't have to lose his father and see his career ruined, and he didn't have to be disfigured in an explosion and die tragically protecting his friends. When you think about it, it seems like the worst thing in the world has happened to him, and the most depressing thing is that the culprit of all this is his best friend Peter. Now he can continue to have friendship, carry out his own business, and reap his own love in the future. In this case, if Norman is still sober, he shouldn't object, right? Ross put the Green Goblin on the hang glider and jumped on it himself, clinging to his shadow, manipulating him like a puppet. "Although you murdered the doctor, you still want to kill me, monopolize our invention, and you owe me a sum of invention transfer money until now, but I still decided to forgive you. Whoever asked you to indirectly help me a lot. Now, let's go through the final procedures together," he muttered casually, stepped on the control panel lightly, and the flight device under his feet flew out with his master silently. At the moment, the police had successfully wiped out the remaining mercenaries and took control of the square. The process was unbelievably smooth. After asking the captives for news, George and others knew that the main force of the opponent was not here. Someone saw them go into the woods and never come out again. The police officer who was good at interrogating just came back from the prisoner, wiped the saliva and nosebleeds from his hands with disgust, and reported to his superiors at the same time. George frowned. What's in the woods? Why did they go there? Sensitively aware of the problem, he immediately asked the park management. Since the construction of the underground entrance building took too long, it took a while for the other party to find the answer. Well, maybe we'll get there in time to see them off. George sighed, now completely hopeless of keeping his seat. As the Secret Service team walked into the woods, George and the others cautiously moved towards the smoking building. The woods were a bit dim, and they couldn't see things 10 feet away. They could only get a general understanding by hearing and guessing. Just as they were getting close to their destination, there was a slight hum in the distance, and George immediately realized that it was the noise produced by the engine running. Green Goblin is here. Everyone pay attention. Before George finished speaking, a giant bat-like flight device came from between the tree trunks with extraordinary dexterity, and then a series of sparks swept across. The gunshot echoed in the woods, startling a flock of birds. Gwen didn't go home, but stood near the police car outside the park and looked in the direction of the square from a distance, feeling extremely anxious. Worried about her father's safety, she is also looking for Ross. Ross was invited to participate in today's parade, which she knew. So how is he doing now? Has he escaped? Is he injured? Will something happen to him? These questions kept swirling in Gwen's mind, unable to shake off like being entangled in a group of annoying water plants. He could only try his best to open his eyes wide, looking for familiar figures among the hostages who had just been rescued by the police one after another. Just when she was very depressed, she saw Mary Jane walking out of the park with Todd's company. At the same time, many tabloid reporters who had reported on Ross also recognized Mary Jane's identity like a fly. They scrambled to surround her and kept asking about the situation inside. Gwen ran over, pushing past the blocking reporters and grabbing Mary Jane's shoulders. "Ross, how is Ross?" After she asked, she remembered the embarrassment between the two. But Mary Jane wasn't in the mood to worry about that at the moment. She was blaming herself for the danger her recklessness had caused Ross. Seeing the distraught look on the silent girl's face, Gwen couldn't help but misunderstand. After a burst of unspeakable sadness, she hugged her friend who had started a cold war because of Ross's relationship. Mary Jane also hugged her, and the two sobbed softly. "Miss Watson, what's going on in there? Has Green Goblin been caught, and what are the police doing? I heard that many people were killed. Is your boyfriend among them? Has he left a will to designate the heir to the property? We demand the truth. The media has the right to know the circumstances of the case." The reporters, not to mention the sad girl, desperately surrounded them and yelled. The actions of these tabloid reporters attracted the attention of other media. Soon one by one microphones were raised in front of them. More than 10 cameras began to shoot, and nearly 100 people flocked to go around and surround Gwen and Mary Jane. Just as the two of them were crying, a familiar voice came from outside. "I say, everyone, don't bully my girl." The voice came into their ears, and Gwen and Mary Jane's bodies suddenly shook, then raised their faces and saw a smiling Ross appearing in front of them. 034. The scene of Ross and the girls embracing affectionately was faithfully recorded by a nearby camera and transmitted to tens of millions of TV viewers. At this moment, the program was watched by not only ordinary citizens and social elites, but also some real big shots, such as 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. The owner of the white sandstone building on the first sat patiently in the Oval Office to watch the live broadcast, then manipulated the remote control to pause the show and turned to look at his cabinet members. "Very well, everyone. This is another heavy blow since I took office. Can anyone tell me where the $40 billion annual intelligence budget has been used by you?" There was no intelligence report in advance, no early warning, and the response was slow after the attack. Could it be we can only watch similar incidents happen again and again? The president is a middle-aged white man with a resolute appearance, who has always been known for his calm and tough style, but now his words are full of irony in his anger. As hard as invisible slaps, the slaps on the faces of the subordinates made these high-level bureaucrats who are usually shrewd and capable lose face. Among the heads of several intelligence agencies, the CIA is responsible for searching around the world for targets that may pose a threat to the United States. It has less responsibility for this. S.H.I.E.L.D. and the FBI have overlapping responsibilities. Being abroad, the director of the FBI, who is mainly responsible for the detection of domestic criminal cases and intelligence collection, had to come forward and explain. "Your Excellency," the head of the FBI coughed and handed over a document that had just been delivered, which densely listed the incident and the suspect's personal information. "As far as we know, this incident is a criminal act caused by a normal commercial merger and acquisition." In his explanation, the details of Green Goblin were revealed little by little. The merger and acquisition of the aerospace industry, the betrayal of the major shareholder. Everything was fully presented, and even the files of those South American mercenaries were dug out. "Here's everything we've learned. Norman Osborn was caught by the New York police on the run after murdering a competitor and a member of his own board of directors after dangerously transforming himself to prevent the company from being taken over, then retaliating. The Secret Service team under the leadership of New York Police Commissioner Stacy took great risks to severely injure Green Goblin, but when they were about to succeed, a man nicknamed Bullseye took the opportunity to assassinate the suspect, and he disappeared. Now a wanted warrant has been issued across the United States for Bullseye and others involved." "What's the origin of Bullseye?" The president frowned and looked through the report, not being very satisfied with not being able to catch the main culprit. "A killer, Kingpin's former chief assassin. We are tracking Osborn's private relationship with Kingpin, but it is clear that he assassinated Green Goblin to avenge his former employer. The preliminary autopsy report has come out. A dagger directly past the vision A nerve stabbed into the cranial cavity and killed Green Goblin. There were similar wounds on the corpses of other criminals at the scene. Although no fingerprints were left behind, this was Bullseye's personal habit. According to the criminal database of S.H.I.E.L.D, Bullseye's original name was Lester, who once worked for the CIA's secret operations team in the Americas, has a strong anti-detection ability. The head of the FBI looked at his colleagues who were standing by with no expression on his face, and casually revealed an embarrassing secret. The president ignored the infighting below, dropped the materials, and fell silent. Although there are results, how do we explain them to the public? The public doesn't need the truth, they just need entertainment. The staff in charge of public relations stood up without losing the opportunity and made the final conclusion for the incident. We can set up Osborn as an enemy of the country and give them to vent their anger, and the touching story of Director Stacy makes them shed tears, which is enough for most citizens. But after that, before the staff could finish speaking, a fat officer interrupted him unceremoniously. This was a colonel who was specially named by the president. He was about to enter old age. He had thinning hair and a sloppy appearance. His eyes were fixed on the White House think tank, which made him a little embarrassed. 6 months ago, the Statue of Liberty collapsed, and you said that you need to be cautious. Not long ago, the road was blocked by someone, and you said that you need to investigate. Today, super criminals publicly attacked the crowd of parades, and you wanted to be perfunctory. You need to be cautious in handling domestic affairs. I can understand the concerns, but please tell me, what should we do if a similar incident occurs tomorrow or the day after tomorrow and we fall into a passive position? No one can answer that question, and no one can take on the responsibility. Colonel Stryker, what's your opinion? The president asked after scanning their faces. I think unprecedented risks are brewing. Please think about it. Green Goblin, Lizard Man, Spider-Man, who has heard of these things before, but now they appear one after another. Can we make such a judgment? That is, with the development of science and technology, the probability of mutation is quietly increasing, and there is also a mutant organization that is more threatening. Through the interrogation of the criminals in the Liberty Island incident, we know that there is a mutant school in north-central New York, and they recruit super ability people from all over the world, train them, and have advanced jet flight aircraft. Such a force is a more dangerous hidden danger than Osborn. We must take precautions in advance so as not to mess up like today. Stryker waved his hands excitedly and called out loudly. But the annual budget is almost used up, and we don't have any extra funds in our hands. The financial advisor looked embarrassed. It doesn't take much money, Stryker said without looking back. I've been working on mutant for decades. We've been relying on meager grants to maintain our research. Now just a little more investment, just a little bit, can keep us going. Compared with national security, I think this a little investment is nothing. So what are you going to do about it? The security consultant asked. Don't worry, I won't start right away. It will take some time to prepare before then. I will make a plan safely, confidentially, and firmly until we achieve our desired goal without leaving any trouble. Stryker stared at the president closely, and now just waiting for his reply. The president pondered for a while. Although Stryker's words were selfish, they did speak to his heart. Before the next general election, he must do something to make voters fall for him again. Colonel, do you promise prudent and effective action? Asked the president. I won't let you see the dead mutant kid on the 6 o'clock news in the morning, Stryker replied. So the president stood up, leaned forward and pressed his hands on the table, looking deeply at Stryker. What do you want? He asked. Your authorization, Stryker replied without hesitation. Coming out of the president's office, Stryker ignored the others and went straight to several high-level officers who were talking and found a lieutenant general among them. General Ross? This General Ross has nothing to do with Ross, definitely. His name is Thaddeus E. Ross. He is an active lieutenant general in the Army. He is independently in charge of the Army's secret research and development base, and his status in the military is quite detached. Wilhelm Stryker? The general turned sideways from the conversation with his colleagues and looked down at the squat colonel with a somewhat indifferent expression. If you don't play with your dangerous deformities, why do you care about me? The general's tone was mocking, and Stryker had no choice but to endure. They are indeed deformed, but they can be very sharp knives if handled well. Really? Seeing that the general was noncommittal, Stryker didn't intend to play around with him anymore. I heard that Osborn's body was taken by your men? That's right, the general said casually. That is the recovery of Army assets. Osborn Industries has received help from the Army, and now we have the right to demand the recovery of resources that were misused. Then, General, can this part of the resources be shared within the Army? If we join forces, we can create a more stable and powerful force to deal with enemies at home and abroad. Stryker suggested hopefully, but was immediately rejected. Coca-Cola and Pepsi are both American companies. Why don't they share the formula? The general asked back. He is not the president whose term is coming, and he doesn't intend to get involved with Stryker, a guy who has been a mercenary and has been stained in history. I think your strategic direction is wrong. The target you want to hit is not consistent with what the Army wants to achieve. This is a fundamental mistake. So no matter what reason you find, you accept the supervision and leadership of the Ministry of Defense without reservation. As long as you continue to insist on the wrong strategy and your goals, my people would not cooperate with you. After General Ross finished speaking, he turned and left surrounded by his subordinates. Watching the general's back disappear into the corridor, Stryker's eyes gradually cooled down. Although he has been authorized by the president, he has little effect on these high-level generals who come from famous military families in the East. Compared with the lieutenant general who has 3 silver stars on his shoulder, he can only wear a small silver eagle which symbolizes the rank of colonel. Moreover, Stryker is close to 62 years old this year, and he will be retiring in a blink of an eye. Compared with the general who is already a senior general in his early 50s, his future is even more bleak. It gave him a sense of urgency, a reminder that he must achieve his goals before stepping away from power. Mutant, I will find a way to deal with you, Stryker thought, turning and disappearing down the corridor. 035. With the official disclosure of Green Goblin's identity, there was an uproar in the fishing industry across the United States. People began to discuss what made the distinguished chairman of Osborn embark on this insane path of no return. Is it just because of the business merger that may lead to the loss of control of the company, or is there another unknown reason? After unremitting digging, the good media finally learned of such a thing from the servant who served the Osborn family many years ago. When Norman was very young, he hated barking dogs very much. One day his parents found out he couldn't find the pet dog at home, so he asked his son if he had seen it. The servants who were present at the time heard Norman clearly reply that he killed the pet with his own hands. It is conceivable that his parents must have been horrified when they heard the answer. It can be seen that Norman Osborn can be so cold-blooded and terrifying since he was a child, and it is not surprising that he turned himself into a Green Goblin when he grew up. In addition to character factors, some people tried to associate him with Kim, thinking that the late underworld tycoon and Osborn must have had a lot of black gold transactions behind the scenes. Their reasons are also very good. According to authoritative sources, Gene Bin's death was caused by Green Goblin's attack, and Green Goblin's final assassination was also done by Gene Bin's killer Bullseye while he was being arrested by the police. It is impossible for the relevant forces to have such a fierce struggle, so there must be some kind of ulterior relationship between the two. During his lifetime, Gene Bing had always been willing to serve big companies and dignitaries in the political circles, helping them deal with ordinary citizens and journalists who did not know what to do. Presumably, there was a discord between the two parties. After the relationship broke down, Osborn blatantly killed the mafia tycoon in order to eliminate evidence. Under the deliberate connivance of the authorities, all kinds of speculations from the outside world have intensified, making Luli as strange as a detective novel. If I had to use one word to describe my mood right now, shock would be the most appropriate. I never imagined that a billionaire with a good image like Mr. Osborn would commit such a horrible act. The attack on the parade, the murder of Dr. Storm, the scientific officer, the killing of the board of directors, and the massacre of competitors in the same industry must be severely punished, said a famous businessman who has a working relationship with Osborn. The purpose of maintaining status is to control power and obtain wealth, but the method of obtaining power and wealth should never be a crime. Power comes from the recognition and responsibility of the world. The growth of wealth comes from the creation and regeneration of value. Nothing doubtless, it is Osborn's departure from this basic understanding that he caused irreparable harm to himself and innocent people. CNN News Channel, high-end talk program. The whole incident has completely exposed the incompetence of the government, the arrogance of criminals, and the reality that social security and order are in vain. The only thing worthy of praise is that the New York police chief, George Stacy, took the lead in charging at the front line of the battle and struck at Green Goblin. His Majesty has selflessly shielded the heroism of his colleagues with his body. I would say he deserves a medal for his courage. Leader of the opposition, House of Representatives. For a while, Almost all the media and individuals severely criticized Osborn. With the common appeal of the government and the opposition, the federal government took advantage of the situation and made extremely unfavorable punishments for the Osborn family business, temporarily freezing the bank account and entrusting the company with a market value of up to $2. Hundreds of billions of huge enterprises. Just wait for the federal Supreme Court to make a judgment, and the losses caused by his criminal behavior will be liquidated. This kind of swift and violent punishment is extremely rare in the United States. In general, street crime is more feared than gentleman crime because of its potential for violence and the destructiveness so vividly portrayed in film and television. But courts have seldom punished elite and corporate crimes as harshly as they have for street crime. According to the statistics of relevant agencies, the sentences of defendants in banks or fund companies who embezzled hundreds of millions of dollars are even shorter than that of car thieves. They can also receive special care in prison and live quite comfortably. The average sentence served is only 11 months. Even criminal crimes can often rely on money to clear the way, and the sentence can be greatly reduced through various legal or illegal means. So this time Osborn was punished so quickly, it was entirely Norman's own doing, and he completely offended everyone. In this turmoil, in addition to affiliated companies and banks running around in order to recover their creditors' rights and divide Norman's legacy, within the Osborn company, in order to preserve its own future and seek benefits, some middle and high-level managers with real power also began lobbying around, trying to find a way to put the Osborn family and business aside. Ross also inevitably became one of the targets of these people. He and Norman once had a deal, and the deal was completed in a private name. Norman couldn't come up with enough cash at the time, so he adopted the method of installment payment, and with the two dead shareholders Feige and Balkan, their share transfer fee was not paid in time. So for a while, Ross became the joint creditor of both parties of Osborn's board of directors. Even if Osborn filed for bankruptcy in the future, he had the right to send his own representative to participate in the liquidation work. Mr. Byrne, now the bankers on Wall Street are very worried that Harry's taking power will cause more damage to the company's image. Our stock price has fallen to the bottom, so for our common interests, I ask you to treat friendship and business carefully. After all, there are still more than 150,000 employees depend on the company for their livelihood, and they need the right management to help the company survive this longest winter. Norman's highly valued subordinate McCann had a loyal and honest face. At the moment, he stood in front of Ross with a sincere face, trying to persuade him to support him and kick Harry away. Ross looked at the doctor and readily agreed. As you wish, I will not interfere with Harry's inheritance rights. Congratulations, Mr. McCann, and I hope you will not forget to fulfill your promise. With Ross's permission, McCann nodded reservedly. Although he still kept a smile on his face, his chin involuntarily lifted. Ross was amused by his gesture, but the deal was done and he didn't say anything more. Watching the triumphant betrayer leave, Ross casually handed the information sent by McCann to the doctor sitting beside him. The industrial park in Westchester? The doctor glanced twice and couldn't help being amazed. This is more than 300 acres of land. Norman spent a lot of effort to get it before he was alive, but McCann is really willing to give it up. Why is he reluctant? Now Osborn is a sick man, and everyone can't wait to get something from it. McCann's goal is the most profitable core industry, the electromagnetic power that Norman has been investing in during his lifetime. In order to build the world's first smart grid, Osborn almost broke the cash chain and finally put it into use. How dare he invest in the new industrial park before recovering the cost? Ross revealed the mystery. The doctor laughed out loud, appreciating it several times, then suddenly raised his head. So, you haven't selected a site for the new laboratory, just for this land? How could the doctor forget that apart from the industrial park in Westchester, a small city in north-central New York, there is another place worth noting, and that is the mutant college they have been planning. But he guessed wrong. Ross didn't guess it would be here beforehand. It's a pure coincidence. Maybe fate is helping us. He stretched his body comfortably, then stood up and put his arms around Gwen, who came to deliver coffee. After a riot in Central Park, the relationship between Gwen and Mary Jane improved greatly. He understood each other's intentions, and sometimes Ross couldn't help being moved. Amid the girl's dissatisfied coquettishness, he kissed her fair and smooth forehead. Letting go of Gwen, Ross walked to the window, looking out at the vast world. What we do is world-changing work, and I believe that one day, we can unlock the mysteries of the universe. But until then, we will face a lot of difficulties. Sometimes if you want to open a door and you don't have the key, then just don't need hesitation. Just fly and kick the door open. This is the most efficient way. Standing in the warm afternoon sun, he spoke. Softly. 036. Norman's funeral was arranged to be held after the military returned the body. The final resting place is located in a beautiful suburb. Originally, Harry's father hoped to be buried in a family cemetery near a certain church, but due to strong protests from the local angry people, he had to be buried in a more remote place instead. The dry grass was everywhere on the hills and slopes, and there were only 20 or 30 people who came to participate in the ceremony, which was very different from Norman's identity, but considering the crimes he committed, even this was very rare. Ross brought Mary Jane and Gwen to attend. No matter what Norman did before his death, they and Harry were classmates after all, and Harry himself was not at fault, and he himself was seriously injured by the Green Goblin attack. When the coffin was buried deeply, the host began to recall Norman's life story. Most of the guests didn't want to stay for a long time and left quietly. Ross and others went to Harry's side to comfort the high school classmate. No matter how bad it is, how painful and disappointing, we all hope that you will not give up hope. You are stronger than the pain you have suffered. Even if you encounter setbacks, don't forget the beautiful and good memories you once had. You are always ours. My friend. Gwen comforted her gently. At this time, she was completely different from the usual carefree look in front of Ross. We all wish you a good life and get out of the shadows as soon as possible. Mary Jane also sent her blessings to Harry. As for Ross, he had already contacted Harry in advance. Whether it was a private connection with an Osborn or a private transaction with Norman, he did not hide it from Harry. He didn't do this to get something from his old classmates, but just to do something for his friends, even if they were just ordinary friends. If Norman hadn't been unable to restrain his inner desire and insisted on sending it up, Ross would not have taken the opportunity to snatch benefits from Osborn. Thank you, thank you. Harry held back his tears and shook hands with his friends one by one, expressing his gratitude from the bottom of his heart. Peter has been with me these days, and now with your encouragement, I promise I will come out. We all believe in you. Ross patted him on the shoulder hard. The deal I made with Norman before his death is still valid. The potion formula belongs to the Osborn family. As long as you need it, I can rewrite it for you at any time. The original enhancement potion was not recorded in the Osborn Industrial Database, and only Norman knew where it was hidden. Another insider, Dr. Storm, had already died in Norman's hands, and now only Ross and Connors can tell. Learn about it. If they didn't speak, Harry would never know what he deserved. So he was very moved when he heard what Ross said, and immediately hugged Ross. What should I say? Harry smiled wryly. He now knew that his father not only murdered other shareholders, but also tried to kill Ross and Connors, but he failed and fell under Bull's eye. Ross was extremely ashamed. Different from the other timeline, in the original world, Harry believed that his father died at the hands of his friend Peter, and took revenge at all costs. He didn't forgive Peter until he found out his father's true face. But in this world, everything Norman did, they were all exposed and became the complete perpetrators. Harry had no idea who he should take revenge on. If it's about revenge, what's the fault of the well-meaning science officer? And what's the responsibility of those innocent citizens killed by the Green Goblin and the mercenaries? So Harry was very discouraged, especially thinking of his father's cold eyes when he was hunted down in the square, looking at him indifferently like a stranger. It really made him extremely sad. Deep down, Harry has long understood that his father appreciates independent and self-reliant young people, such as Peter and Ross, who can support themselves, and Ross can make a career, but Harry knows that he is not that kind of person. Although he also fantasized about succeeding his father and creating a world, but after fantasizing, he often had deep doubts about himself, because Harry knew very well that he didn't want that kind of life. And he didn't want to be like his father forever. Like an arrow on the root, the gong strings are always tense. Ross saw Harry's confusion, so he didn't say any more. Things are over, your life is just beginning, how about some advice? He asked. Harry nodded, asking him to express his opinion. After the company's business is over, leave New York and go abroad. Human beings are always forgetful, especially in this constantly bustling city. If you travel abroad for a while, the citizens will soon forget everything. After a few years, you will take a girlfriend comes back and you're still young and rich, and most people don't take what happened before too seriously. Ross' suggestion was very much to Harry's liking, and he had something good to tell his friends. Actually, I've found my love, Harry said shyly, introducing a dapper brown-haired girl to Ross. Felicia. I was my father's assistant. If she hadn't dragged me away that day, maybe I would have died. Felicia stepped forward generously, chatting with Ross and the others like a hostess. Saying goodbye to Harry, it was already late when we returned to 57th Street. Ross and Mary Jane had dinner, and then completely idled away. We seem to have forgotten something. Is there something we should have done but didn't do? Rosmo pouted his chin and pretended to be silent. Mary Jane pointed to the TV, which was broadcasting a news broadcast from a certain country. Okay, let's start studying. Ross lost all lust at once. When she woke up again, the sky was already approaching dawn. Through the huge French windows in the bedroom, she could see the stars on the dark blue sky. Mary Jane knew that the morning sun would rise from the boundless horizon in a short time, shine its orange warm sunshine on the world. Ross, like a snake without bones, she snuggled softly into her boyfriend's arms, her eyes half closed and her body pressed tightly against his body. Huh. Ross responded casually. It's great that you're all right. Mary Jane put her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, and said softly, in fact, she is still very guilty. Rosmo moped her hair and hugged his girlfriend tightly. Congratulations to my friendly Xiao Freyer on his birthday. Please accept the belated wishes. 037. This weekend, Ross was invited to lunch by another person who benefited from the Green Goblin incident, Gwen's father, local police chief George. During George's tenure, the area was attacked several times. It was difficult to keep his position. However, due to his extraordinary bravery in the arrest operation of the park, he was jointly commended by the chief and the Congress, so he miraculously secured the position of director and took the opportunity to gain the respect of other factions in the police station. Afterwards, when he recalled the new type of body armor that provided him with great protection in the face of Green Goblin's counterattack, he couldn't help thanking his daughter for sending Ross's invention. For this reason, he would invite Ross to have lunch with his family no matter what, and express his gratitude. At 11 o'clock at noon, Ross walked into the Times Hotel on 5th Avenue, which was only a stone's throw away from the Empire State Building. The restaurant with a Mediterranean taste, although it is temporarily listed as a Michelin E-star, but it is due to the short opening time and Michelin's preference for French style. For those who really know how to appreciate food, its taste is quite good. You can see the most classic chef's craftsmanship at an affordable price. Choose here to see the usual habits of Stacy's family, low-key and pragmatic without extravagance. Through the marble spiral staircase, Ross went straight to the door of the restaurant, and then met the George family and their friends in the bar lounge area. This is Ross, Gwen's friend, our genius boy. Ross, this is Will, my colleague and old friend. George introduced each other. If Ross has a better understanding of the police chief, he will know the fat Will in front of him is George's friend for many years. When Green Goblin was arrested last time, Will was the first to stand up to support George, but because he underestimated the body armor sent by Gwen, he was almost hit by a stray bullet in the woods. George rushed out just in time to push him away, only a few pains in his shoulder. Knowing that he could not escape the catastrophe without Ross's new products, when Fatty Will heard that George was going to invite this inventor who has a close relationship with Stacy's family, he had the cheek to join in whatever he said, and thanked him in person. This young man who indirectly saved himself. After the two thanked each other, Ross smiled and waved his hands again and again. Actually, it's nothing. We invest resources in research and development and production, and ultimately we want to provide better protection for everyone. If anyone here is more admirable, George and Will are worthy of everyone's praise. Without your bravery and fearlessness, maybe the city is still in the shadow of the Green Goblin. So I suggest that everyone have a drink later and pay tribute to all the police officers who guard New York. Without their dedication, there will be no peace for the general public. Ross enthusiastically praised the two high-level police officers in front of him. If he only aimed at individuals, he would be flattering, but the suggestion of paying tribute to all the policemen met the wishes of George and Will. The Lord nodded again and again, and his perception of Ross couldn't help but become more pleasing to the eye. After the greetings, the group walked to the main restaurant, where walnutwood tables, chairs, and floors are the main color, creating an atmosphere similar to a business lunch gathering place. It is not known for luxury, but it is more comfortable and cozy. In such an environment, everyone took their seats one after another, and under the funny eyes of several parents, Gwen's mischievous brothers deliberately took him to the seat of his sister, so that the two of them were close together. Gwen secretly glared at her brothers and sisters, but it didn't have any effect. She could only sit side by side with Ross with a blushing face. Her expression fell into Ross's eyes, and she couldn't help being a little funny. Usually, this guy is very nervous, and her private personality is very different from her first impression to outsiders. She is a bit rough when she speaks and does things. In the laboratory, she has always been very casual towards Ross, and she is very generous in occasional physical contact. I didn't expect to change back to the appearance of a lady in front of my family and elders today. The magnitude of the change is unimaginable. In fact, this is not surprising. As far as Ross knows, Gwen's father's family is from Massachusetts and New England, and his mother's family is European immigrants who migrated from the German-speaking Netherlands after the World War II. Both sides grew up in environments known for their conservative behavior. What kind of education this girl usually received at home? So this kind of personality contrast is also normal. Why isn't Mary Jane here? Gwen turned sideways and whispered to Ross while his parents and the Wills were looking through the menu. She's gone to the dance training room. You know she owed too many lessons during this time, and she has to retake lessons. Breathing in the faint fragrance of her body, Ross also replied softly. The two looked at each other, feeling a little subtle about each other. When Mary Jane was strictly guarding against Gwen before, she didn't make the girl worry too much. Now that the two girls are back together, Gwen sometimes feels a little reluctant to let go, and has become a little more passive than before. Maybe it was that misunderstanding hug outside the park that led to some real friendship between the two girls, so they didn't want to hurt each other. But from Ross' point of view, his desire to have these two girls has become more eager. In Ross's previous life, he had seen too many beautiful women and had already developed some aesthetic fatigue. For him now, a beautiful face can only occupy a very small part, and a kind heart is the truly precious beauty. But to achieve this ulterior goal, he still has a long way to go, so there is no need to be anxious right now. Several people ordered this week's chef's selected menu, respectively. For $79, you can taste 4 signature dishes that the chef is good at. It's okay for a few adults. George's 2 sons, Howard and Simon, are growing up. So I gave them another. They ordered fish steaks in a Southern Italian style, and while they waited for their main course, they chatted casually over dessert. The new body armor is really excellent. Yesterday, I sent them to the internal technical department of the police station for testing, and found that its indicators have exceeded the highest level of police armor, and the same position can continuously resist 0.30-03 caliber rifle bullets. And it's extremely light in weight and doesn't need lining steel plates and 3-dimensional fibers. How much are you going to price it? George asked casually while buttering the bread. He never forgets his work even when he's on vacation. The market assessment is still underway, but according to our preliminary discussion, the price to be put into the market is about $2,000, and the quotation for the Ministry of Defense is even lower. Ross put down the knife and replied. $2,000? The fat man exclaimed. His exaggerated tone startled his wife and Gwen's mother, who were talking about women. Do you know what the price of goods of the same standard can be sold in the market? $38,900. Will waved his arms excitedly. Little stars almost appeared in his eyes, and he could see the danger. It touched him a lot, and I am afraid that he has spent a lot of research on suitable armor in private. Ross definitely knew it, and what he wanted was this effect. He won the military order in one fell swoop and created a sensational topic. He's had enough of living in the shadows, and this is just the beginning, and more shocking things will be invented in the future, so that they can be taken seriously enough to make those hidden under the surface automatically emerge to him in front of. So as I said earlier, products are invented to be used by people. Ross smiled, raised his glass to the dazed fat man, and answered casually. The body armor is only the first invention in the laboratory, and there will be other things in the future. When I was very young, my father once told me that he hoped to use his invention to change the world. Although he was unfortunately imprisoned, but his words have influenced my life for many years. My desire is similar to his. I don't expect the world to change completely because of my invention, but I hope to change the way of life of human beings with my own creation. They don't have to be expensive, as long as they can be as popular as washing machines and refrigerators in the world. Liberating people from heavy pressure and making life easier for everyone is enough. In the eyes of several well-informed adults, Ross said these words in the name of his father, which is more surprising than his claim to buy the Empire State Building. After all, this young man is not only an inventor who is good at inventing new things, he is also a very talented businessman. If he works hard enough and accumulates huge wealth, he may not be unable to do so. But when they heard Ross's wish, the ambition hidden in the simplicity inevitably surprised several elders. George and Will couldn't help but re-examined him carefully. The two wives and Gwen also agreed. The eyes are full of light. At first, they were only amazed by Ross's creativity. It's not unusual for a young inventor to have wealth. Before Stark's disappearance, the newspapers were full of his lace news every day. Although there was nothing new in the same way, readers were willing to buy it, and the file-size newspaper was also happy with it. When Stark disappeared, a group of tabloids represented by the Daily Bugle compared Ross and Tony in order to save sales, and the outside world believed that it was just another self-proclaimed Stark. Ross had some doubts about the relationship between Ross and his daughter, wondering whether the young man would lose his way under the hype of the outside world and implicate his daughter. When they met again this time, the two finally let go of their hearts. Ross is still the same Ross from before. As gentle and wise as before, he is quite kind to the elders and Gwen's two younger brothers. But it wasn't until they heard his words that the George suddenly felt that this young man's realm was completely different from Stark's. While Tony was still indulging in sensory stimulation, Ross's ambition had entered a wider world. He began to want to change people's way of life. Who can do this? Historically, only Newton, who discovered gravitation, Edison, who invented electric light, and Ford, who popularized automobiles, achieved similar achievements. Newton created classical mechanics and opened a new chapter in human understanding of the natural world. Edison invented the electric light, which greatly changed human life. Ford directly reversed the traditional development model of the American business community and became a representative of the American dream. They are all profound in history. Even Tony's father, Howard, failed to reach similar heights. At this moment, Ross's image suddenly became taller in their eyes, and there was even a faint respect that needed to be looked up to. The two families had no doubt that Ross could accomplish his lofty goal. Cheers to Mr. Byrne. I think he will be proud of having such an excellent heir. Fatty Will made a rare and serious proposal, and the others raised their glasses one after another. Ross, what I want to say is that although Mr. Byrne didn't leave you a huge fortune, and he didn't have time to fulfill his father's obligations and make you go through a detour, I think his influence on you is precious enough. It's a pity that I didn't have the opportunity to visit your father. He is a great man. I believe you will go to greater heights in the future. Work hard, Ross. George solemnly comforted the young man in front of him, and several people gently touched the glass. 038. Several people were chatting, and the enthusiastic supervisor led the waiter to push the dining cart all the way over and began to serve them the first dish, foie gras cold pie. Fat will welcome this dish very much. It could be seen that he had a preference for greasy food, and this dish was just right for him. The sweet and rotten figs have a fruity sweetness, the dried fruit flavor of walnuts and the natural sugary aroma of honey make the cold pie even more sweet. And what's rare is that the portion of this dish is still considerable. Will also, without picking up the knife, his chubby face had already been buried in the past, and he took a few deep breaths before raising his head. Nice. Will gave the supervisor a thumbs up and then complained to George. When we went to California to communicate, the foie gras at Thomas Keller restaurant attracted me the most. At that time, we often sneaked out from the training base to eat this dish, but since the foie gras was banned in California, we never saw each other again. It's time for a proper French meal, and today I must order another foie gras to try. Yes, I still remember that the restaurant used to be a stone-built century-old French laundry. The flavor is very unique, but can you still eat such greasy food now? Has your doctor warned you about the dangers of high blood fat? You couldn't even run in the woods last time? George was dividing the foie gras on the plate. Although the livers of these geese had undergone treatments such as devascularization, seasoning, and pickling, they were carved into circular shapes by molds, and the chef cut them finely roasted into a rice-like color. It is very appetizing, but in his opinion, it is too fatty to eat often. Oh, don't mention it. Will's wife gave her husband an angry look. Not only does the doctor talk about it every time he sees him, even his favorite TV show Aaron for a Week also mentioned this topic a few days ago. Everyone said that obesity will cause disease, but he didn't listen to anything. Guess what? What did you do in the end? He just quit the TV show. Fatty's actions are hilarious, but everyone still cares about his health. In fact, you can eat less meat, eat more vegetables, don't eat too much at night, and exercise properly, and you will lose weight soon. Gwen's mother also advised this friend. But Will's head was shaking like a rattle, and he didn't even want to think about the feasibility of dieting. Unless scientists invent quick-acting diet pills, I'd rather eat and die. Will, who is always easygoing and funny, is only very persistent in diet and refuses to bow his head no matter what, but he is not really willing to be so fat going down. So I looked at Ross and asked him a question. Ross, have you considered diet pills? This market is also very promising. Definitely, Ross nodded with a smile. We will also pay attention to this aspect in the future. That's great. Will slapped his hands and shouted overjoyed. Don't forget to inform me when the time comes. I would rather buy your medicine at a high price. Speaking of buying, George remembered one thing. Ross, the body armor Gwen gave me was used last time. How much should we pay for it? It is the property of the laboratory, and I cannot take it away at will. George didn't mean to be hypocritical when he said that. Receiving a gift is a very sensitive word. The Ethics Office is a government agency that specializes in supervising the professional ethics of federal government officials. According to its regulations, any public official is strictly prohibited from soliciting or accepting things for himself or his family with the purpose of influencing official actions. Gifts, including receiving and soliciting gifts from subordinates. In addition to the regulations of this agency, states usually also have their own charters. Taking New York as an example, public officials cannot receive more than $50 in gifts per year, and even dining out has very strict rules. For example, when you go to a subordinate department for inspection, you can only accept biscuits, drinks, etc. entertained below, but you need to go to a restaurant to pay for your dinner. Strictly speaking, George is not yet a federal civil servant. He is a high-level police officer employed by the city government. Although he was promoted through the civil service examination, the New York City Police Department is not a federal agency, so it is not included in the scope of civil servants. However, due to his character, he has always demanded himself seriously. From the beginning of the grassroots policeman until now he has become the director, and has never changed. So Ross did not try to persuade him. It's okay to do business, which is convenient for both parties. Since everyone could understand each other, the lunch atmosphere on this day was quite pleasant. After paying the bill, Ross and Gwen left and went for a walk outside together. You can rest assured that they will be together? Will's wife was a little puzzled. Her husband liked to read street newspapers, so she also knew a little about Ross's personal situation. She knew that he had a girlfriend, and that girl was just like them, Gwen's high school classmate. Let them go with the flow, after all. They are young people. Gwen's mother was very open and patted the back of her best friend affectionately, persuading her to relax. From the point of view of George and his wife, the problem is really not big. Ross, Gwen, and Mary Jane are all under 20 years old. In terms of age alone, Ross is even 1 year younger than his own daughter, so even after a few years and some of them withdrew, and they were not too old at that time. After all, this is the United States, where the divorce rate is as high as 50%, and more than half of the families cannot make it to the end. It is unrealistic to stipulate what young people can and cannot do. It is better to let them go and let them judge who is right, the most suitable person. At this point, Gwen's parents have faith in their daughter. Based on the experience of a pair of people who have experienced it, life is accumulated over time. Mary Jane aspires to be an actor, while Ross is a scientist at heart, and Gwen can be his best assistant. After a few years, or even more than 10 years, the lives of the three will be different. The divergence in trajectories will become bigger and bigger. When they look back on this period of time, they will find that the weight of each other's memories is very different. Gwen's influence on Ross will definitely exceed other people, and the long-lasting relationship isn't it made up of life fragments one by one? They believe that Ross will make the right choice, and that a sensible daughter should have the courage to face the challenge with her own charm if she wants to gain her own happiness. In fact, Gwen herself thought so. No one knew what significance the park incident had in her life. Before that day, Ross was a very good boy whom he was familiar with. He was more of a friend than a lover, but the misunderstanding that day changed her mind. Gwen began to realize the significance of Ross to her. At some point, this high school classmate Gwen has already walked into her heart and occupied an extremely important position. As long as she thinks about leaving him, Gwen's heart will become incomplete. She doesn't want to bear the feeling of emptiness for a second time. No matter how far Jane's friendship develops, Gwen will not give up Ross to her. If one day, Ross chooses one of them to be his life partner, then the other person should also offer his blessings sincerely. When they reunite in the future, the two parties can also sit down and have a drink and continue to maintain a deep friendship. Gwen and Mary Jane had privately agreed on this point, only tacitly, but they never dreamed that this guy Ross had already come up with crooked ideas to catch them all. Walking to a square, soft music played, and many young people hugged and danced to the melody. Ross also hugged Gwen, and the two danced a waltz together. "What are you looking at?" When her parents were not around, Gwen became more courageous again. Seeing the boy she liked admiring her face very close, she asked with wide eyes, "What is Ross looking at?" Definitely looking at her lively and lovely face. Beautiful, big eyes, a little bit of joy, a little innocent, a little mature, and a little naive at the same time. If every era needs the image of a little girl of that era, then Gwen is the representative of this kind of little girl. She is a girl who is both ordinary and extraordinary, with bright spots and flaws, a bit beautiful but not perfect, carrying the dreams and happiness of girls in this era. His eyes were full of admiration, and he actually looked embarrassed at this girl, Gwen. Her eyes wandered around Ross's face a few times, and then she didn't know where her attention slipped. Staring at Ross's chin without speaking, he moved his feet mechanically, but luckily he didn't step on the other's foot. After a few slow turns on the dance floor, Ross took the initiative to stir up the topic. The last time we got close together like this was in high school, right? Yes, it's our prom. Gwen was still a little dazed. Did you fall in love with me then, so you stayed by my side? Ross blinked. Bah, you're not ashamed to say such things. Gwen finally recovered and gave him a hard look. Nothing happened. I just studied with Dr. Connors. Do you want to hear me say that if I don't see you, I will be so entangled that I can't sleep at night? Why not? Ross raised his eyebrows, and Gwen found that his eyebrows were long and elegant. Others would look frivolous if they did it, but Ross had an indescribable taste in doing it. It's free and easy and natural and short. It looks good. Gwen took a few more glances before turning her gaze away. Well, I admit that you are partly right, but I don't know whether I should feel good about it or worry about it. At this moment, she thought of Mary Jane. Ross was very important to her, but in turn, Gwen also knew what he meant to Mary Jane. I have loving parents and 2 lovely brothers, but Mary Jane really only has Ross. She didn't know how to face it, and Ross didn't say anything, just led her to dance slowly to the music. After the end of the song, the young people on the dance floor did not disperse, and the rhythm gradually became faster, from a slow waltz to a fast-paced Viennese waltz. Ross and Gwen followed the rhythm of the music. Walking in the crowd, each other can clearly feel each other's heartbeat and body heat. Ross gently buried his face in Gwen's hair, breathing in the natural fragrance emanating from the girl. He could feel the girl's warm and indifferent breath, and he could even feel the natural ups and downs of pulses under his fingertips. The girl unconsciously relaxed, dancing with his footsteps. The melodious music rippling in the square, Ross and Gwen strolled along with the beat. Their bodies hugged each other gently, and at the same time they were always in a coordinated state of coordination. Lifting, tilting, and swinging were all very natural, and the dance steps were undulating, with an elegant and gorgeous posture, both lovers and an old couple who know each other well. When the last note faded leisurely, the 2 of them finally stopped. Gwen, who was slightly tired, was a little short of breath, and thin sweat appeared on her forehead. She took out a handkerchief, and Ross took it naturally and wiped it clean for her. Well, you dance really well. We have a tacit understanding. Gwen smiled slightly, then took the boy's arm in a kiss, and the 2 walked out of the dance floor. 039. After a period of time, the new laboratory site in the northern suburbs of New York finally completed the design plan and officially started to break ground. Before Osborn bought this land, the area had a history of development and construction. It was not a wasteland. The foundation had already been laid, and the new building plan used a large number of relatively light metal and glass materials. Therefore, it will not be long before the whole laboratory can be initially completed and put into use. In Ross's plan, the new cutting-edge technology laboratory will be a majestic landmark building with an oval ring structure as a whole. The upper part is a curved building covered with glass curtains, and the ding feet, echoing the blade-shaped building, while the exterior maintains a beautiful pastoral style. The parking lot, apron, and other leisure facilities are surrounded by green trees and lawns, which can be well integrated into the surrounding green rolling hills and woods. It is estimated that after completion, it can accommodate 6,000 employees in the future. They will become Ross's right-hand man and provide the necessary support for his various ideas. On this day, Ross stood on a nearby hill and watched from a distance, while Connors and others behind him led a group of invited independent scientists to appreciate the prototype of the future laboratory. Looking around, you can see the elegant surroundings, and the transportation is quite convenient. There is a high-speed highway network passing through the small town of Westchester, and there is even a light rail railway heading south to the Bronx subway station in New York. Such conditions are very attractive. As far as Ross knows, after the Norman accident, many builders wanted to buy this land. They all wanted to build 500 or 600 houses here, transform it into a large collective housing area, and then great price to sell. It has to be said that without Osborn's downfall and McCann's private communication, it would have been difficult for Ross to win the land. Definitely, the local government also has considerations for small towns. The development of residential areas will not add much color to this suburban town favored by the rich, but if a high-level science laboratory is built, in addition to a large amount of real estate tax revenue every year, it can also create there are a lot of job opportunities, and it won't put any pressure on the town's service resources. So with the assistance of all parties, the land transfer is so smooth. Connors was chatting with his friends about Ross's vision, and some of them became interested in the lab. Soon a fat man nearly 6 feet tall walked up to him, and the two chatted. This used to be the Human Body Research Institute of Trask Industry. The dwarf scientist Bolivar Trask was a smash hit with cutting-edge biological research in the 1970s. Later, because of the persecution of mutant, he was involved in a serious political incident and was imprisoned. It has been abandoned since then. Osborn bought it a few years ago and wanted to turn it into a new type of industrial area, but then there was a big scandal like Green Goblin, and now it is in your hands, Ross. I hope you can develop this place again. Connor's friend Otto Octavius knows a lot about this place. He is a very talented scientist in nuclear physics research. The doctor knows that Otto has been trying to find a way to create new energy for many years. But suffering from insufficient funds, he was specially invited to Ross. Ross definitely welcomes this gentleman. In fact, he also knew Otto's other name, Dr. Octopus. In the original timeline, the doctor was funded by Harry, the new head of Osborn after Norman's death, to research new energy machines for Osborn. He lost his beloved wife in the accident and was confused by the out-of-control artificial intelligence mechanical tentacles and became a dangerous supercriminal, relying on robbery to continue his research work. Originally, Otto's fate was very bleak, but now that Harry has planned to get out of Osborn's quagmire, he will naturally not spend a lot of money to sponsor his research. Only Ross can support him, and Ross has already made up his mind. After all, Otto's invention achieved considerable results later, but he was unlucky and was disrupted by Peter, the little Spider-Man, and failed to truly perfect the new energy. Now with Ross, presumably Otto will not repeat the same mistakes. Along with Otto, there are also some familiar names, including Erik Selvig, who studies astrophysics, Samuel Stern and Maya Hansen, who focus on biological genes, and the young Korean geneticist Helen Zhao. These are the people that Ross knew were involved in the future of some powerful people. I didn't expect Connors to have such a wide network of contacts, so he invited all these people together. It turned out that he even invited an alumnus, Reed Richards, who had an argument with Ross in Central Park. This gentleman is also hungry for funds, but just before today, Reed was lucky to get funding from his college classmates, so I can only apologize. Excuse me. Seeing such a group of talented people gather, no matter how many of them are willing to join the cutting-edge technology laboratory, Ross will raise their hands in welcome. Leading everyone back to the center of the lawn, the waiter has already prepared the tables, chairs, and tableware for the open-air reception. A ding-ding white parasol is propped up to cover the hot sun at noon. There is an atmosphere in which people want to be intoxicated. Gentlemen, Ross said, looking at Pete, who was lurking in the crowd, but didn't expose the guy who wanted to take the opportunity to interview the news. Dear everyone, just now Dr. Connors has introduced our vision for the future. The fact is just like what he promised to everyone. We expect to make achievements in genetic biology, new energy, and new materials. In addition to these in the future, we will also increase investment in other basic research in order to better contribute wisdom to the world. Different from decades ago, scientists today are facing more and more complex problems, which will have a profound impact on the global economy and the environment, such as energy, pollution, human evolution, intelligent engineering. Now for these aspects, there are still many questions we don't know the answers to, but we know that the most promising way to find the answers is to let first-class researchers enter first-class laboratories, motivate them with a sense of urgent task, and let them form the best research teams, bringing together the expertise needed to look at these problems from multiple angles, create the smartest, most practical solutions. Some people may wonder, why do we want to build such a laboratory and invest huge funds in unmeasured research activities? Is the purpose for profit, or is it just a part of interest? What I want to say is that each of them has a part, but they are not all right. In the process of my joint research with Dr. Connors, we noticed that the impact and penetration of science on modern society have been deepening over the years. At the same time, in the process, the friction between science and traditional social values is also increasing. While the public maintains a high degree of trust in science, they gradually begin to resist controversial technologies, accusing us of becoming vassals of power or being capital. Speaking of which, this kind of resistance is increasingly becoming an obstacle to the development of cutting-edge technology. In the financial world that focuses on efficiency, companies are unwilling to invest in basic research, and the government is also powerless in the face of its own financial problems. But without basic research, new products cannot be created, and these products will give birth to new industries, create excellent new jobs. So when we realized this, we found that this is a heavy responsibility, but it is also a huge opportunity. We can use our unique resources to bring together talents from academia and industry, bringing together a group of highly intelligent, highly educated geniuses with a strong curiosity and work ethic to solve the grand challenges of our time. To this end, We have established this cutting-edge technology laboratory, as well as a new, open teamwork approach, with a large number of state-of-the-art laboratories and experimental equipment, and most importantly, we have sufficient funds to ensure that these key factors can maintain continuous follow-up for several years, or even decades. But we alone are far from enough in this laboratory. A single inventor burns his life, and it is not as good as a group of outstanding experts working together. Therefore, I hope you can join us as we breathe life into our fun and captivating world. After speaking, Ross raised his glass to pay tribute to top scholars from all over the world. His remarks touched many scientists. These so-called independent scientists are scholars who cannot or are unwilling to receive external funding for various reasons. Now Ross's remarks have opened another door for them. So these people came over one after another and explored how to cooperate with Ross in turn. Ross answered them patiently one by one, and wrote down some questions that were not considered or could not be decided temporarily and discussed later. Connors sneaks Ross aside at his spare time. Ross, all the above is very good, but what about the best equipment you mentioned? I asked various manufacturers, and their orders have been queued for a year, and if they are going to be put into use, they must at least we have to wait a year to get the latest model of supercomputer. Otherwise, we can only rent computing resources from other institutions, but it will be very troublesome to operate. Don't worry, Doctor. Ross clinked his glass comfortingly. His eyes flicked across the small town in the distance and looked at the mutant academy in a remote corner. What we need must be the best in the world. I can feel it waiting for us there. What we have to do now is to hold on for a while. I promise you. The two toasted and drank, and then Ross turned to meet another guest. 040. Waiting is never pleasant, whether the belated partner is beautiful or not. Although Ross made verbal assurances to the doctor, it is still unknown whether things will definitely develop as he foresees. At night, when he couldn't see the way ahead, he had to plan a backup plan while choosing to trust people's personalities and experiences, because many things will change as the external environment changes. But there are always some decisive factors that will not be easily shaken. Ross believed that as long as Stryker hated Mutant, he had to seize the golden opportunity in front of him. And Stryker's opportunity is also Ross's opportunity. Once he misses its graceful swaying figure, Ross needs to find the bald boy named Jimmy from the vast crowd, and rely on his unique ability to temporarily eliminate the threat of Mutant. But until then, Ross has plenty of patience. He waited all the time, quietly waiting outside the X-Men's field of activity like a shark thirsting for blood, observing every move in several key locations through the ubiquitous internet and satellite cameras in the sky. Take a step back and look at the whole situation, he said to Toad, the toad next to him, while watering the potted plants on the table. If you want to swallow a whale, you can only use this method, tearing off one piece at a time until the whole whale is swallowed. That makes sense, sir. Todd was a little confused. He felt that Ross didn't call him here because of these words. In fact, it is. Putting down the watering can, he told the security director to sit down across the desk, and Ross stared at him with a scrutinizing look across the desk. It was said a long time ago that there is a special power in Ross' eyes, which can make people's pulse rush or make people cold. Today, Toad was no exception. He was stared at by his boss very cramped. He didn't know where to put his hands and feet, and soon there were thin beads of sweat on the tip of his nose. After applying enough pressure, Ross finally broke the silence. Mr. Todd, this time. His voice was unexpectedly soft. It's been 4.5 months since we first met, and I've had my eyes on you during that time. I would like to say that you fit my needs perfectly, but what I want to know is whether I also meet your requirements. When? Definitely, sir. Under the tension, Todd couldn't help stuttering, and he nodded vigorously. Previously, Toad had never been so relaxed and comfortable in brotherhood as he had been with Ross these past few months. Speaking of relaxed and comfortable, it does not mean that the laboratory did not assign tasks for him. On the contrary, Todd's responsibilities are quite heavy. He not only has to take on the heavy responsibility of laboratory security, but also accepts assignments to do some private work from time to time. In addition, he and Sabretooth Victor take turns serving as bodyguards for Connors and Mary Jane at certain dangerous moments. It can be said that he lives every day. I was very busy, and sometimes I even used the time for rest. If he was an ordinary person, he might have filed a complaint with the labor union for overtime work and used a labor lawsuit to coerce the hateful employer to make concessions and compensation. But for a mutant like Toad, this level of busyness will only make him he felt more fulfilled than ever. So it is absolutely impossible for him to make other opinions. So Ross continued, the salary I offer you is $180,000 per year. According to recent statistics, This figure ranks among the highest 6.5% of household income in the United States. That is, only 1 out of every 15 families, and you meet the standard, which is more than many white-collar couples who have received higher education. In addition, I also bear all your taxes, help you eliminate your previous criminal records, and give you the best benefits now. You can freely go to restaurants that you have never been to before, taste those delicacies that you have never tasted, and socialize with beautiful girls. I believe this is something that your previous boss could not give you. Am I right? You're right. You're right, Todd said repeatedly. His body leaned forward slightly, and he couldn't help but bend his waist even lower. At first, he was willing to follow Ross, not so much to repay Ross for saving them from death, but because he and Sabretooth had nowhere to go after Magneto was captured, and it happened that Juggernaut next to Ross was their fellow mutant, so Todd stayed. But after more than 4 months, he has become more and more inseparable from the fresh and wonderful life under the sun. I will say this not to show off my efforts. I think your performance is fully worthy of this figure, so I plan to increase your salary next year and let us share our achievements. But at that before, I also want to remind you that there are some things that must be chosen, whether to return to the Brotherhood full of crises, or we will fight together to achieve greater gains. I think you should have your own choice. Todd finally understood and frowned in confusion. He guessed that Mystique had put on makeup a few days ago to find out what happened to him. Mystique wants to save Magneto, but she needs help. Brotherhood is a mess, and no one will listen to her orders. So she slips back and asks Toad to accept her assignment. But although Toad was beaten and scolded by Magneto every time before, Brotherhood the system made him only loyal to Magneto, and he didn't need to be so obedient to Mystique, so he directly rejected the other party. It seems that this matter did not escape Ross's keen eyes, which made Todd feel a little regretful, and he should have reported it to his boss immediately. Raising his hand to stop Todd's eager explanation, Ross stood up and walked slowly around the table. I understand that people always have some pursuits. Without secrets, we are not ourselves. But please don't limit your vision too much to the previous perspective, and don't always use fighting for living space for your compatriots as a reason. What I did not hidden from you. You should know what I'm doing, common man. Mutant? Technological advances are rapidly closing the gap between the two. Genetic inequality may be achievable in the future with money, so I think you don't have to be loyal to anyone anymore, and you don't have to be loyal to anyone. Throat dry swallowed, Todd was a little panicked. His heart is fighting fiercely like a battlefield. His fear of Magneto and his expectation of a new life are like two deadly rivals. One must lose the other to win, but reason tells him that it is not wise to give up either side rashly. What people do. As for the betrayers, Toad knows very well that the former boss will use the cruelest means to deal with them, and the unpredictable new boss is not someone who can be dealt with casually. For Ross, the more he knows, the more awed he feels in his heart. This young man has too many secrets, and all kinds of methods emerge endlessly. He is as invisible as a bottomless abyss. Unlike Magneto, he survived the initial fear afterwards. The rear is unobstructed. Todd was thinking nervously. A lot of sweat dripped quietly from his forehead. Beads of sweat dripped from the tip of his nose, hit his trousers and smashed his body into pieces. Only then did he wake up again. Looking at the equipment on his body, those metal ear studs that can resist mind control, the close-fitting super-strong combat uniform, and various high-tech tools that he has never used before, the balance in Todd's heart unknowingly turned to Ross's side. Tilted a little. Magneto wasn't without money, but he'd never spend that much on his MEN, no matter how much the Brotherhood leader is proud of Mutant. Toad knows very well that Magneto is still a Jew who believes in miserliness at heart, and he cares about gains and losses. Moreover, this standard of gain and loss is not a clear standard that can be measured by others, but an invisible line that only exists in his own heart. If something is worth 1 million, but the seller asks for 2 million, as long as the price can be negotiated to 1.2 million, even if he still thinks it is too high, he will still buy it. The standard in Magneto's mind is whether his actions have a positive impact on the result, not the actual income. Todd used to think that this way of thinking was just a quirk of character, but after being with Ross for a period of time, he began to gradually realize the capriciousness of his former boss. Todd knows that Ross's daily life is not very extravagant. He only pays for reasonable enjoyment, but once he encounters something worth selling, whether it is equipment, technology, talent, or funding a certain congressman, he will have no hesitation invest sufficient resources. If Magneto can attract talents like him, pay attention to coordinating internal and external relations, and don't be so stingy. Maybe he has already legally owned his own territory in a remote place. In comparison, the old and new masters are far behind in terms of risk, stamina, and knowledge. When he was thinking nervously, Ross's seductive voice continued to echo in the room, and every word touched him deeply, and it went all the way to his heart. Now that you are born for yourself at last, and you have a good fortune, don't you want to find a woman, have children of your own, and be respected by your neighbors in front of your wife and children? Follow me. It's all available. You can live more comfortably and proudly than the white-collar workers out there, but they'll never enjoy the conveniences that you do. One person's dead end and sunset can be another person's fresh start. At that point, he may be rising as high as the morning sun, and I want you to be by my side as we go up. He patted Todd's shoulder meaningfully, and the head of security immediately jumped up from the chair reflexively. I figured it out, sir. Todd, who was not good at words, finally made a judgment, and he shouted excitedly. From today onwards, I will work as hard as Victor, and nothing like the last time will ever happen again. I will focus on completing your assignment, no matter what work you give me. Don't be like Victor. Ross stopped him again with a smile. Victor doesn't need brains, he's more like my weapon. When I ask you guys to do something for me, it's enough for Victor to say yes, sir, and for you, I hope you learn to use your wits and your strength, but don't give up your thinking. I have great hopes for you. Todd nodded desperately. From this moment on, the slight sense of alienation in him completely disappeared, replaced by a closer look. Very good. Ross shook his shoulder in satisfaction and finally stated his purpose. He needed Todd to take advantage of Brotherhood's turbulent period and bring some useful people from there. Ability didn't have to be very powerful, but the background should be clean, so you can use it with confidence. He was fed up with this manpower shortage. In the past, Ross didn't hire people outside because they were too weak to keep his secrets from the prying eyes of interested people, but now it's for long-term plans. Mutant, who has different values from ordinary people, is not easy to be infiltrated and bought by the outside world, and whose various needs are easier to meet will be his future human resources base. As long as he beats Magneto in the Xavier Academy, no one will threaten him in this regard again. I see, sir. I will not let you down. Todd nodded solemnly, and then exited Ross's office. Watching his back disappear behind the door, Ross exhaled a hollow breath. 041. Entering December, the weather is getting colder and colder. The temperature has been hovering below 32 degrees Fahrenheit for several days. After several days of turbulent dark clouds brewing in the low temperature, the first snow of this winter finally fell over the city. Pieces of white, fluffy snowflakes are slowly falling from the sky, dressing this huge city with dense skyscrapers into a piece of silver makeup, reflecting a faint light in the dark. On the brightly lit streets, the hustle and bustle of the world did not end due to the snowfall. The voices of people, cars, and music from various shopping malls intertwined, adding a touch of warmth to the cold world. Looking along the endless street, countless vehicles with flashing lights are slowly passing through the snow. Pedestrians on the side of the road have changed into thicker winter clothes, and occasionally they come across a homeless man covered in newspapers and plastic bags. There will also be people who show kindness and generously throw them a few coins. Phil Coulson walked alone in the crowd. He had just finished the task assigned by S.H.I.E.L.D. Before returning to the local branch to report on the execution, he first came to a cafe near the shopping street. He was going to pick up a part-time job there. Girlfriend Audrey, who plays cello for guests, is off work. Following the flow of people through a long street and two intersections, Phil Coulson arrived at his destination. Through the window of the dessert cabinet outside the store, he saw his girlfriend who was pulling the strings. Audrey is not beautiful, but her temperament is quite elegant. At this moment, her expression is very devoted. Her body is swaying with her waving arms, and she is completely immersed in the melody of the music. Seeing her full devotion, Phil Coulson felt his heart gradually calm down, as if washed by a clean, hot spring. Although it was still cold outside, he seemed to be bathed in warm sunshine. He didn't open the door to go in right away, but stood by the window, staring inside through the glass window, waiting for the remaining smell of gunpowder smoke to dissipate with the wind. Few people in the at-the-moment store noticed the outside. They were far away from the hustle and bustle of the city, and they were drinking fragrant drinks around the table, talking and chatting, or reading newspapers and magazines with the rising heat in their cups. In this brick-built retro shop, Audrey was dressed in a musician's dress, holding a cello and accompanied by another musician to the young girls standing by the fireplace. They were performing Heine's poems, riding on the wings of singing. On the wings of song, follow me, dear, Violet smiled and whispered, looking up at the bright star. The rose whispers her fragrant mood, the gentle and lovely antelope. Jump over and listen carefully. the waves of the holy river in the distance, there was an uproar. The clear melody and soft accompaniment paint a warm and romantic picture. It seems that the girl is riding on the wings of singing, going to the banks of the Ganges with her dear ones, listening to the gurgling sound of the holy river in the distance on the quiet moonlit night full of red flowers, jade lotus, roses, and violets. In the coconut grove, enjoy the joy of love and dream of happiness. During the melodious singing, chatterers stopped whispering, newspaper readers took off their glasses, and people turned their heads to listen to the singing quietly. Phil Coulson looked at the people inside, and gradually a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He patted off the snowflakes on his head and shoulders, held his two cold hands in front of his chest, rubbed them hard a few times, and took a few breaths of hot air. Just as he was about to walk to the door, he held onto the handrail to open the door. Suddenly, the door opened by itself, and a burly man with silver hair and shawl came out from the inside. When he was about to pass Phil Coulson, the big man suddenly seemed like he found something. So he stopped immediately, stood between Phil Coulson and the store door with a blank face, and stared at him with sharp eyes condescendingly. The man just approached slightly, and Phil Coulson's heart immediately trembled, and the hairs all over his body stood up involuntarily. "Hi, is there anything I can do for you?" he greeted in a harmonious voice, with one hand reaching into the hem of his clothes to hold the handle of the gun. He took a slight step back, his body curled up slightly, and he was ready to enter at any time the state of intense exercise. However, the big man didn't answer, just looked at him with wide eyes, and at the same time his nose moved slightly, as if he wanted to sniff out something from Phil Coulson. S.H.I.E.L.D's high-level agent was a little embarrassed when the other party refused to evade. He didn't want to have a conflict with such a tough hand for no reason, and he couldn't just turn around and leave, so the two of them froze for a while. Fortunately, the girl singing inside discovered the situation at the door in time, and ran out to call the big man back, so Phil Coulson was able to get out of this inexplicable danger. "I'm sorry, sir. Victor's head was injured." The girl pointed to her forehead and apologized to the agent repeatedly. He bared two sharp canine teeth. It's okay." Phil Coulson waved his hands again and again. At this time, he recognized that the girl apologizing was the girlfriend of a young scientist who had recently gained fame. He didn't expect her to bow down and sing in such a small shop, probably to sharpen his singing voice, the high-level agent thought. He had some discernment, and he could tell that girls didn't look like academy students who had undergone long and rigorous training. According to the standard of a singer, her voice quality is not strong enough, and her performance skills are also weak. It is just right for a performance in a coffee shop with limited space, but if it is on the broad stage of Broadway, it will seem a little insufficient. Many singers have gone through this stage, quietly growing up in bars or coffee houses, and then expecting to become famous on stage. However, when this girl named Mary Jane sang, she also had agility that other singers did not possess. In the dimness, Phil Coulson could hear a kind of youthful nostalgia, just like being transformed into the girl in the song, happy to enjoy the precious time of innocence and happiness. Every time her eyes flicker and goop hand soars, this feeling becomes stronger. This rare temperament makes the girl look extraordinarily different. Even if she only has simple light makeup and pure hairstyle, her appearance looks exquisite and flawless under the gentle light. The appearance of such a girl made Phil Coulson somewhat unexpected. He watched the girl bring the big man back to the store, but he didn't follow him in. Instead, he subconsciously looked around again, as if he wanted to find out if there were any S.H.I.E.L.D around. Colleague. He wasn't worried about any troubles. On the contrary, troubles were always the guiding light of S.H.I.E.L.D agents. What he was worried about was whether something would happen and his girlfriend would be involved. Phil Coulson has always kept the boundaries between work and private affairs very clear. He doesn't like to mention his relationship status with his colleagues, and he doesn't want anyone to know that he is in a relationship with Audrey. Although this is inevitable, if possible, he even wanted to divide himself into two halves. One half turned around and walked into the snowy night. The other half pushed the door in and stayed by her side like an ordinary man. But he is not a separate person, so he can only be cautious and try his best to maintain this state. After looking around and finding nothing unusual, Phil Coulson looked inside again through the glass covered with large sheets of water vapor. This time he was surprised again. In the corner of the coffee shop, a beautiful woman in a long red dress jumped into the room. Jane Grey. Phil Coulson silently read that person's name, never expecting that there would be three people who should have nothing to do with each other in this unknown shop. Jean's identity is not a secret to the high-level agent. As a representative of the Mutant Academy, Phoenix has participated in contact with the outside world several times, But at that time she was a gentle and capable woman, but now Phoenix seems to have become another alone. She sat alone in a dark corner. Her eyes were unfocused, and she exuded a faint aura of keeping strangers away. Just when Phil Coulson was puzzled outside the window, a car stopped on the side of the road, and a man wearing dark red glasses got out of the car and pushed a wheelchair to bring a kind-faced bald old man to his side. Ignoring Phil Coulson, who was standing next to him, the two talked to themselves. It looks better today. Maybe contacting ordinary people can calm her down. After looking through the glass for a while, the bald old man said, "But I still feel that S.H.I.E.L.D is very different from before." The man behind the wheelchair was worried. It must be that the last time she was in distress on the island caused her a serious psychological shadow. "Can I treat her again, Professor?" "I will if necessary." The professor sighed slightly and cast a casual glance at Phil Coulson next to him. This glance seems to have seen through the entire life of the Aegis agent, leaving him with no more secrets to speak of. Sweat instantly soaked Phil Coulson's underwear. He knew who it was, one of the two giants of mutant Professor Xavier, the famous Mind Master. Even an old man brought far more pressure to Phil Coulson than the strong Victor just now. Fortunately, they didn't say anything else. They just stood quietly outside the window, waiting for the crowd to disperse in the coffee shop that was about to get off work. In this state, a car pulls up next to Mutant's car, and Ross gets out of the car. The night wind blew his hair. Ross looked at the girlfriend who was running over without looking aside, and put on a windbreaker for her as if he hadn't seen the three familiar faces. Behind Mary Jane, Jean came out, followed by Audrey. The three women related to the three parties just passed by outside the cafe. The two cars went away separately before Phil Coulson let out a long breath. His intuition quietly reminded himself that there seemed to be something that needed attention, but his reason could not analyze it. "Phil?" The careful Audrey raised her head and wrapped the backs of her two cold hands with her hand used to play the cello. "It's okay." Phil Coulson smiled and pulled her into his arms. In Mutant's car, Cyclops carefully talked with Sheen, and occasionally turned around to find that the professor looked wrong. "Is it because of Sabretooth?" he asked immediately, thinking that Brotherhood's old rival should be following a normal person, and Cyclops felt a little uncomfortable. At this point, he couldn't think of anything more. The professor didn't answer, and as the car drove across the road, the streetlights outside the window made his face flicker on and off. After a long time, his voice sounded. "Tomorrow, I'm going to meet my old friend." As he whispered to himself, the car of the Mutant Academy accelerated into the boundless darkness. 042. In the secret cell on 97th Street, the killer Bullseye, who hadn't seen his face for a long time, sat on the floor with his legs spread out invisible, his eyes staring straight at a piece of cheese in front of him. Today, his food was cut in half by Ross again, because he didn't complete the task he had given last night. To keep an eye on every move of the Mutant Academy. He didn't know what happened to Ross and Professor X yesterday, and even if he knew, he didn't care. After being imprisoned in this small space, isolated from the outside world for 100 days, Ross successfully transformed Bullseye into a humanoid beast that lived only for food. Hunger not only emaciated this powerful killer, but also nearly destroyed his will, and only a few screens hanging on the wall were his only entertainment. Or more accurately, he survived the only reason. Now he only knew that he was going to be hungry again today. This difficult life seemed to have no end, which was really unbearable. During the day, when there is plenty of light and Ross's automatic detection system kicks in, the Bullseye can take a break. At this time, he can't help recalling the good old days when he followed Jean Bing to various banquet restaurants. At that time, he could taste delicious food at will, and arrogantly lectured those trembling chefs, making them look like dogs, just as busy. But now, he could only sit on the floor blankly, chewing on the tasteless cheese bread like chewing broken wood chips. After hesitation for a long time, Bullseye carefully picked up the piece of rough cheese and gently sent it to his mouth. As soon as the tip of his tongue touched the honeycomb-shaped hole of the butter body, stimulated by the food, saliva was secreted uncontrollably, which almost wiped out his ugly black-blue uniform. At this time, I must be very similar to the stray dogs that I used to kill casually on the street, maybe even more pathetic and helpless than them. Bullseye thought sadly, and suddenly felt the urge to cry. God knows how many years he didn't know what it was like to shed tears. In the past, they always burst out of other people's eyes, filled their cheeks with screams and begging for mercy, and they were always teased mercilessly. But when I came here, the world was turned upside down. He knew that in this hellish den, he was the weakest one. Whether it's the silly fat man in a red vest, or the more powerful and ruthless Ross, Bullseye, the killer, can't deal with it. Even the middle-aged scientist Connors, who looks very weak, is an extremely dangerous guy. Bullseye will never forget that when he tried to strangle the doctor who came in to deliver food and forced him to take him out, he suddenly found that the person he was holding had torn his clothes and turned into a giant lizard. At that moment, facing the sharp minions and the huge head, Bullseye collapsed, almost thinking that he had entered a science fiction movie. However, after the collapse, he regained his rationality and still had to find ways to survive. Even living like a wild dog can't quench Bullseye's desire to survive. Wiping off the debris on his fingers, he sniffed hard and looked at the screen again. The scenes shown on the screen ranged from a noisy college campus to a desolate wild reservoir. Guessing from Bullseye's experience, it may not be in the same country, otherwise there will be no obvious difference in landforms and vegetation. When he finds something, he only needs to press the button next to it, and soon someone will come in and generously reward a large piece of barbecue. Although there are very few opportunities to get rewards, this is already the only enjoyment in Bullseye's life. As long as he thinks of the taste of meat, his saliva can no longer be controlled. With such a strong desire, he sat up straight again and stared at the screen with wide eyes. This time, he made a surprise discovery. While Bullseye was mourning, on the other side of the lab, Ross had just sent away the mutant recruited by Toad. These people are peripheral members of Brotherhood. They don't have any abilities worth mentioning, but they are hostile by the people around them. They can't find a way to make a living and can only live with hunger and food. Back in the day, they were a liability that even Magneto would dismiss. Although the Brotherhood leader is holding the banner of winning the living space for his compatriots, he is a Darwinist in his heart and doesn't care about the incompetent people. Most of the time, he just sends them to play the role of cannon fodder to make ends meet. And even this kind of life was unsustainable after Magneto was arrested. Fortunately, when fate closes a front door, it always likes to quietly open a small window on the side. This time, the luck came. The former assistant of Magneto, Toad, found these people, promised them a decent job, and then they bring it up to Ross. After some reassurance, Ross handed these people over to Todd. They will receive some necessary training, and then appear in certain positions that require special secrecy. They will be led by fellow mutants. These people can be used with confidence. After everyone left and the office fell silent, Ross thought for a while and started calling Arizona. "Ross, I saw you on TV. Mom is so proud of you." As soon as the call was connected, the excited voice of Mother Janet rang out on the other end of the microphone. One can imagine how excited she was at the moment. After all, not every woman can have such a young rich son. But Janet will never know that the real son has long been replaced by another person. "Yes, Mom, I think you read it right. Ross played the role of good son." This period of time has been enough for him to know the living conditions of his ex, and it is basically impossible for him to reveal any flaws, especially the special situation of the Byrne family. Even if there are some abnormalities, Janet is unlikely to find out. After chatting unhurriedly for a while, Ross seemed to ask inadvertently, "Mom, have you received the things I sent? Are those jewelry and pendants? I have already received them. I like them very much, and Gregory also finds them novel. We wear the jewelry on our bodies." Scat deliberately tied the remaining decorations with silk threads and put them on the top of each door and window. They all hang one. "Is this an Asian custom?" "Yes, it is said that it can prevent bad luck and bring good luck." The corners of Ross' lips curled up slightly. He definitely would not tell Janet that those are the last guarantees to prevent Professor X's mental power from getting out of control and launching indiscriminate attacks on ordinary people. After all, Janet is the mother she is now, and Ross will not be stingy if she can make her a little bit safer. The two talked for a while, but Ross never showed any flaws. His tone was calm and natural, and the topics were very close to life. He talked about his work, Mary Jane and Gwen, or the recent news about crops, mother and stepfather's farm for some references. No big deal, but enough expression of son's concern to make Mother Janet very happy. After chatting like this for 10 minutes, he heard some movement on the other side of the microphone. It seemed that Janet's adopted daughter Sky had returned. "Hi, Ross. Thank you for the gift. Definitely, I mean the new phone. Those pendants are exhausting me." The lively little girl immediately got the microphone. The girl was abandoned outside when she was very young. The Janet couple she was found, but was reportedly declared ineligible for adoption by a local court due to some legal issues and awarded to another family. Sky's luck was bad, and the adopters behind her suffered accidents and died one after another. After several years, no one dared to approach her. Fortunately, the Janets met the girl again at this time and brought her back to their home. Here, she got the rare family warmth, so she loves her adoptive parents very much, and also includes Ross' big brother in New York. Definitely, S.H.I.E.L.D is so close to Ross, who has never met, and Ross's gift offensive is also indispensable. He has always been very good at pleasing children. Don't waste your money by more useful things. If you dare to trade them for unhealthy things, be careful and I will beat you later. Knowing her character, Ross acted like a big brother, and S.H.I.E.L.D was also very willing to accept his warnings, and he always insisted on entanglement and telling a bunch of funny nonsense with his mouth. Ross? No, big brother. S.H.I.E.L.D snapped back, as if Ross was glaring at her. Is the relationship between Mary Jane and Gwen really that good? When I can meet them, I really want to see with my own eyes whether the real person is as beautiful as the photo. Then wait until you pass your computer course, and if you get an A, I'll send you a plane ticket. As Ross said, he suddenly received a prompt from the detection system, and almost at the same time, the bullseye signal also lit up. After waiting for so long, the opportunity finally came. Soon I'm going hunting. Remember to wish me luck, he said to S.H.I.E.L.D. His eyes narrowed slightly. 043. The night was dark and the wind was howling, and the Xavier College on the outskirts of the small town was plunged into darkness. From a distance, it looked like a gloomy ancient tomb. Only when there was thunder and lightning in the sky could the interior of the building be seen through the broken skylight. Fierce exchange of fire. The helicopter circling behind cast a bright beam of light. Colonel Stryker stepped on bricks and rubble, walked into the big hole blasted on the side of the building under the strong light, and entered the mutant base. On his left and right, hundreds of heavily armed soldiers swarmed in. Their faces were painted with various colors, and they held special firearms in their hands. They walked slowly along the corridor. The lighting devices on the barrels emitted beams of light in the darkness. Dazzling light. Reporting, sir, mutant resistance is very fierce. Our snipers used adamantium bullets and successfully wounded several dangerous elements among them. Now we have pushed the battle line to the entrance of the underground elevator. Next, ask for instructions, came from the earphone. Hearing the reports from his subordinates and listening to the continuous gunshots and angry roars, Stryker adjusted his glasses, and a smug smile appeared on his fat face with a gray beard. Great job. I've sent support. Don't worry about the resistors now. I want you to take someone to the second basement immediately, open Xavier's brain wave search room, and take out the machine inside intact. Clear. Ending the call, Stryker slowly admired the building. Not since 1962 had the college been so messy. The ground was littered with messy paper debris, and the white and neat walls were gouged out by lasing bullets with a large number of honeycomb-shaped holes. Burnt marks can be seen everywhere in the building, and the doors, windows, and furniture that were originally full of classical style were smashed. Only the bare frame remained, broken glass and wood chips scattered all over the carpet, and occasionally a broken wire appeared on the ceiling, making a hissing sound in the dark corner and bursting out a cloud of silver sparks from time to time. Stryker has been looking forward to this doomsday scene for too long, but has been afraid to act rashly because of the powerful threat of mutant. Until today, when Professor X and Cyclops, who went to visit Magneto in prison, fell into his hands carelessly, Stryker was able to seize the opportunity and launch a lightning raid. In fact, simply comparing the strength of the two sides, the Academy with 3 X-Men, Aurora, and Logan, and young students such as Iceman and Pyro still surpassed Stryker's troops, but through his careful planning, the sniper unexpectedly used alloy bullets seriously injure Stormgirl and others, so that even if Wolverine can still fight, Phoenix can provide support, but they have to protect their injured companions and face dangerous opponents, and they will inevitably feel powerless. The elite soldiers fought back again and again. In another timeline, due to the scattered forces of the X-Men, only Wolverine Logan remained in the Academy, so Stryker's people did not lose much and easily occupied the entire Academy. However, even if mutants' remaining strength exceeds expectations this time, the sneak attack turned into a positional battle, and his direct troops suffered heavy casualties. But as long as he can get the brain wave strengthening machine that Professor X can release psychic power to the world, then everything is worth it. When the sun rises tomorrow, all mutants will die. Stryker is convinced of this. Soon, he saw what he wanted. Caressing the instrument, Stryker clicked his tongue a few times in admiration, and then delivered the final instruction to his confidants. I leave it to you here. I just ask you to stand firm for 2 hours to prevent the mutant from pursuing, and then it's up to you to decide whether to retreat or continue the attack. Understood, sir. We will win. The subordinates were full of confidence. Facing mutant, achieving such a result was beyond their imagination. Don't be stingy with using alloy bullets. They are no longer important. This is the battlefield where they will finally play a role, especially for that wild dog that is used to biting people. Aiming a shot at his head can have the greatest effect. Trust me, I've had success before. Pointing to his forehead, Stryker turned and left without hesitation, taking the Cerebro device with him. With heavy cargo, he came to the square in front of the main building, where his large helicopter was parked. Seeing that the victory was in sight, Stryker, who was in a good mood, hummed the popular songs of his youth rarely, and directed several soldiers to carefully place the instruments. What else can stop me? No more. Looking through the porthole at the building in the night, Stryker casually gave the order to take off. It won't take long for him to reach the secret base near Lake Acalia, and then mark the end of his life's pain and pursuit. As for how many innocent mutants would die, 100,000, 200,000, or millions, tens of millions, Stryker didn't care. Closing his eyes and beating the beat, Stryker was intoxicated in his dream. But after the other helicopters left one by one, the colonel's landline was still hovering over the academy. When he realized something was wrong, he opened his eyes and jumped up, only to find that there were "I don't have my own men." The person flying the helicopter at this moment is Toad, Magneto's missing assistant. Sabretooth and Juggernaut are standing on both sides of the brainwave strengthening machine, and opposite him is a strange guy with a lizard headgear. Stryker quietly pressed the handle of the gun. The metal bullet gave him some confidence. "Mr. Stryker, nice to meet you." A voice came from behind. Stryker pulled out his pistol and turned around sharply, only to find a man wearing a black mask standing a few feet away. His voice was like a wave formed after some kind of resonance, and his gender and age could not be heard at all. Cold sweat broke out for a moment. Stryker knew that he had fallen into someone else's hands like Professor X. He didn't have any hesitation for a second. His finger pressed the trigger, and the bullet made of the world's hardest metal burst into orange sparks. Under the push, they flew through the barrel of the gun one after another to the man in black on the opposite side. "This is one of the most uninspired opening lines I've ever seen," grumbled Ross, who had just changed into the latest gear. The next moment, a strange change occurred in his senses. Stryker's actions seemed to be in slow motion, and the bullets floated in the air with obvious airwave trails. Other than that, the whole world was silent. In this fantastic state, Ross spread his fingers head-on. Bang, bang, bang. The world only stopped for a moment, and then everything returned to normal, and the dull gunshot of, at the moment, sounded in the cabin. Stryker's eyes widened, looking at Ross's outstretched right hand in disbelief. Between his fingers, tightly held the 3 metal slugs that had just been fired. "Who are you?" Stryker backed away. "It's not important anymore." Ross' figure swayed and appeared in front of the other party, holding him by the throat and lifting him up high. "I'm an army colonel. You can't kill me. Charles Xavier is still in my hands." Stryker struggled desperately, trying to convince Ross with dual reasons of identity and hostage. But Ross wasn't impressed at all. "I thought we would start with an academic discussion, but now it seems that maybe I just need to say goodbye to." As he said, Toad slowly opened the hatch, and the strong night wind came in from outside, blowing Stryker icy cold. No, Stryker yelled vaguely, but the pressure on his throat was getting bigger and bigger. He tried his best to break Ross's fingers, until he suddenly let go and lost his support. "Goodbye, Mr. Stryker," Ross said, and threw him from the sky with a wave of his hand. Wilhelm Stryker let out a heart-piercing scream in midair. At this moment, the past flooded into his mind like a flood. The excitement when he followed Trask to persecute mutant when he was young. The pain when he accidentally discovered that his son Jason was a mutant. The joy when he caught and killed the mutant target. Until today when his wish is about to come true satisfied. Many lights and shadows come and go, like a revolving lantern. In these illusory scenes, Stryker saw many long-forgotten figures. They stretched out their arms to him, revealing Death God's mysterious smile. In the illusion that he could not extricate himself from, Stryker smashed through the skylight with huge kinetic energy and fell from the ding. There was a muffled sound that made the scalp numb. Cough, cough. He twitched involuntarily. His body took on an unnaturally distorted shape. A large amount of blood sprayed from his mouth and nose, and soon, his consciousness fell into boundless darkness. Stryker's sudden death caused both sides to pause for a moment. Everyone looked at the man lying in the middle of the battlefield in shock, watching the dark red blood slowly spread from his body. "He's here," Chin Yu said. Recalling the man in black who almost killed her in the Liberty Island incident, she could feel that the danger in the dark was approaching herself again. Then a strong light shone in from outside the building, and Ross, dressed in black, walked towards the crowd stepping on the bright light. "I'm sorry to disturb you all." Under the dazzling beam of light, he bowed slightly like a court noble. "But what I want to say is that none of you can leave today." 044. When the voice fell, the whole building seemed to be still for a moment. Everyone held their breath, staring closely at Ross, who walked in from the strong light, and watched him walk to the center of the two warring parties, standing at the place where the colonel fell. At his feet, the bright red blood flowed quietly from under Stryker's twisted corpse like a winding river. The black figure is like the thickest darkness in the night, and the bloody red river is like a scorching hot magma. The sharp contrast formed by the two is like countless invisible sharp knives, which deeply hurt people's eyes. In the next second, the angry soldiers turned their guns in unison, and fierce gunshots suddenly sounded in the dilapidated building. "He killed Colonel Stryker to avenge the commander. Attention all units, aim at the target and fire. Kill the mutants." Shouts like these came from the mouths of the sergeants with higher ranks at the same time. Before the voice could spread out, it was drowned in the deafening gunshots and explosions. The bullets all over the sky were driven by countless dancing flames. Like swarms of ferocious man-eating bees, they crazily pounced on the man in black, standing between the soldier and the mutant with lethal force. XXX. Before Ross could dodge, the X-Men behind him already felt that something was wrong. Facing the crisis, Logan the Wolverine was the first to react, turned around and picked up the two junior students behind him, using his strong body block the stray bullets from the opposite side for the children. Puff, 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 puff. There was a series of soft sounds, and a cloud of blood burst out from Logan's back. Just being swept away by the edge of the fierce offensive, the powerful kinetic energy has already beaten Wolverine to the ground. He took a few steps forward and was about to hit the wall with the help of two senior students. Keeping the balance. "Logan, be careful." Aurora, the storm girl who narrowly escaped the bullet, screamed while clutching her bleeding shoulder. She wanted to prop up her weak body and summon a few thunderbolts to share some pressure for her friends. Fortunately, S.H.I.E.L.D was in time, standing in front of her and Logan, hands outstretched to keep the metal rush out. Enduring the powerful kinetic energy, the wall of invisible psychokinesis shook violently. After paying the price of nosebleeds, S.H.I.E.L.D finally blocked the impact. "Storm, take the children to the tunnel. It's too dangerous here." Wolverine waved its claws to block the shrapnel rebounding from the side, and shouted violently, "What about you? Let's go." Aurora screamed at him, but as Ross moved on the other side, the soldiers expanded their range of attack and swept them in again, making it impossible for Logan and Jin to leave. In Logan's memory, he has never been hit so hard like today. Even if his previous opponents can overwhelm his physique, they can't destroy his undead body, let alone damage his hard bones. Except for Professor X, who is proficient in psychic power, and Magneto, who is good at controlling metal with magnetic fields, no one has ever given him such a big threat. But today he suddenly discovered that his adamantium skeleton was facing the adamantium bullet from the same source. There is no chance of winning at all, and they can only fall into the predicament of being passively beaten. If he can remember the past, Wolverine will not be surprised. It was his creator, Stryker, who pierced Logan's hard skull with an alloy bullet, depriving him of his most precious memory. For an intelligent creature, even if the immortal body is still there, it will not really lose its life. But if the memory is broken, it can only lose a part of its life from now on, and it will never be found again. Under Wolverine's yelling, Aurora gritted his teeth and pushed away the students who were helping him behind him, and sent them one by one into the escape tunnel, but he stayed behind. "Professor, please bless us." The storm girl leaned against the wall weakly, silently praying to the most respected old man in her heart. In her dark pupils, brighter and brighter orange flames were reflected. Film. 30 feet away, flying shrapnel envelopes Ross in the midst of a metal frenzy. This area is far more dangerous than the X-Men area. Almost as soon as the soldiers launched their attack, the burnt smell in the air was saturated, with the sound of machine gun fire, shouts, and constant explosions. Constantly heard, vibe and air waves made this historic building tremble, as if it might be destroyed by a violent attack at any time and its foundations would collapse. In this stormy barrage of gunpowder smoke, Ross's erratic figure never stopped for a moment. He was like the most vigorous sailfish in the North Atlantic, facing the huge waves head-on, swimming freely in the most dangerous place. Current. The target moves too fast, and the sniper cannot lock the action trajectory. Don't shoot blindly, distribute firepower by area. Heavy firepower. Prepare the grenade. The officers not far away issued orders one after another. Ross ignored them for the time being, carefully felt every change in his body, and wholeheartedly grasped the power he had acquired not long ago. In the process of researching and learning from the ability of Juggernaut and others, Ross gradually formed his own style. He did not need too large and stiff body tissues, and also weakened the recovery ability of infinite cell proliferation. According to his long-standing habit, he allocated more of the useful characteristics to speed and flexibility, so that his mobility was greatly improved again. Now, if we compare it with other mutants, if Juggernaut is an invincible elephant of war, then Ross is a swift and fierce bird of prey in the air. Never look back on the mobile combat style. If in the past, it is really not easy to do this. You must know that every time the speed is increased, the pressure on the corresponding human body will increase accordingly, regardless of whether it is started or decelerated. Even if an ordinary person can move at the speed of sound in an instant, his sudden start and stop will only cause his own death, because this speed change will make the human body bear 40 or even 50 times the gravity of the Earth's surface. When this pressure comes, just like a 3-ton elephant falling on a person, it can immediately smash him to death by vomiting blood. But the wonder of mutants lies in the infinite possibilities in their genes. After Ross absorbs the cellular characteristics of Juggernaut and puts on the latest combat equipment, he is able to resist the impact of a stronger force, so as to obtain faster and more violent acceleration. Sabretooth's restorative properties can also automatically repair it after damage. With such a super speed, the densely launched barrage is like a slow-moving snail. Although it is slowly approaching with a trail of air waves, it cannot cause the slightest damage at all. Under the control of Ross, the speed increased faster and faster, but the swing range became smaller and smaller, and finally it was as fast as lightning, and only slight vibrations appeared on the outside, like the wings of cicadas or bees in flight. Almost translucent, he became familiar with his own strength, and the soldiers on the opposite side ushered in their own doom. Boom. Boom. The grenade fired by the heavy firemen produced several huge explosions. The bright flames spread in all directions with hot air waves, instantly engulfing the area where Ross was located, and the violent force knocked away all the remaining window frames nearby, leaving patches of scorched black potholes on the walls and floors. This time it should be a success. The soldiers thought so. They let out a breath of sulking, and just after their bodies relaxed for a moment, a ghostly black figure swept past the raging flames with a faint stream of light, rushed straight into the crowd. The first to be attacked were snipers using alloy bullets. With a wave of Ross's hand, the strong wind pressure immediately turned into a sharp blade of air, tearing apart the fragile neck of the sniper. Only then did the terrified sergeant in front of at the moment turn his body like a stiff wooden man, with a faint sound in his ears. The air wave in his eyes was watching the more and more obvious bloodline between the throats of his colleagues. When they turned around completely, the look in the eyes of the sniper dimmed. Blood mist poured over their bodies and faces. At this time, the deadly death god had already left, and stepped across the space to come to the heavy firemen. These two soldiers are experienced veterans who have been fighting with Stryker and Mutant for many years. Although they encountered a more powerful enemy than expected in a hurry, they still maintained a calm psychological quality. The machine gun shooting never stopped, relying on their extraordinary intuition fired violently at Ross' path. But this kind of attack can't leave his footsteps. Just a few interspersed moves, Ross has come to them, lightly pressed the shoulders of the two. The huge kinetic energy made the heavy fireman lose his balance, and they fought separately. Turning around, they staggered around and fell to the ground. In the process, the machine guns in the hands of the two people didn't even have time to stop firing, and the fiery red metal torrent whipped fiercely at the surrounding colleagues like whips. At this moment, time seemed to be frozen, and it seemed extremely long and clear to other people's eyes. The silver warheads roared like a series of raindrops, but the soldiers who had no time to dodge could only watch these tiny bullets. The messenger of the death god is getting closer with a cold breath. Puff, 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 puff. Hundreds of machine gun bullets hit their own people almost at the same time, immediately causing an astonishing scene of blood and flesh flying across the crowd. Without even a chance to repent, the two heavy firemen were smashed to pieces by other soldiers who fought back out of control. What? The few surviving sergeants lost their minds and rushed towards Ross while shooting at him. The black figure flickered in the tiny space, and the bullets kept piercing through the looming afterimage, hitting the wall and floor behind it. In the end, the figures of the two sides crossed each other. With their backs to Ross, The sergeants behind them froze for a moment before slowly falling down. 045. Watching the group of elite soldiers who had beaten their own side down like lambs being slaughtered one after another, the mutants had no time to rejoice and only felt icy cold. God! Wolverine widened his eyes and swallowed involuntarily. He's faster than a gust of wind. He was amazed, thinking quickly in his mind, if he was facing Ross, how to deal with him in order to gain the upper hand. But after thinking about it, he always felt that he had no idea. When Wolverine was distressed, Ross, who was standing in a pool of blood, looked back at them. The irrelevant people are gone. Now it's your turn. As he spoke, he walked towards the mutant. As Ross approached, the Wolverine showed its sharp claws, protecting the two women and retreating slowly. Why kill people? Why target us? We just want to survive. Is there something wrong with that? Holding the wound on her shoulder, Storm Girl shouted behind Wolverine, her sharp voice echoing in the dilapidated building that was ventilated everywhere. From Ross's perspective, her expression is sad and angry, like a shivering puppy, stabbed and bruised by the cruel world, but still trying to show its teeth to the perpetrator. Listening to her question, Ross chuckled under the mask. Why are you so afraid of me? I only came here to complete an extremely great mission. You think I am a villain like Stryker, but in fact I just did what I should do. Every step is like this, even not too much, not too little. Storm Girl and the others didn't understand the meaning of his words, but became more vigilant. Or can we change the subject? Facing a dangerous situation, with two wounded women behind him, the usually irritable Wolverine was uncharacteristically not jumping up to fight, instead trying to get more news from Ross. Are you a mutant too? Are the Professor and Scott in your hands? That doesn't matter, friend. What blood can do, so can technology. As for Professor Xavier, I can only say that he is not here yet, but I believe you will meet soon. At the place I designated for you, as Ross said, he listened carefully to the movement in the corridor, and with the sound of heavy and hurried footsteps, Juggernaut, Sabretooth and others escorted the students who were trying to escape from the tunnel and appeared on the edge of the blood-stained hall. Sheen, Aurora, John, Bobby. The teachers and students shouted each other's names. It would have been a joy to reunite after the catastrophe, but now that the situation is unknown, being brought together will only make them more nervous. Everyone is staring at Ross intently, ready to greet him at any time. A stormy attack. But what made them temporarily relieved was that Ross didn't do it immediately, but nodded to Toad, and then Toad and the doctor took the newly recruited men into the elevator entrance and went straight to the second basement to pick up another extremely precious equipment. That is the supercomputing core that Ross promised to bring to the lab. Archimedes said, "Give me a fulcrum, and I can pry up the whole earth." This saying has been passed down through the ages. What I want to say now is that you are the fulcrum I have been looking for, Ross said, looking past the Wolverine blocking the front. He looked at the students behind him. Please don't think of me as an intruder. On the contrary, I am here to bring you a better life. You are young and have extraordinary abilities. You should have good prospects, but the reality is that you can only be like fugitives or hiding in the corners of the world, just like stowaways. But now, I want to open up a new path for you. You don't need to hide anymore and worry about other people's harm at any time. Follow my footsteps and I will make you live like a princess noble life. His voice echoed in the hall, and the young man's face showed a variety of complex expressions, ranging from panic to hatred, but in some faces, Ross managed to see the confusion lurking. As he thought, not every young man is willing to spend the rest of his life in this narrow campus like an ascetic. Living like a princess? Good idea. Wolverine shrugged his shoulders, trying to defuse Ross's temptation. What do you guys think, Bobby and John? I won't believe him. Bobby Iceman's firm voice came from behind, and the others echoed. Hearing their words, Logan felt a little relieved, but he didn't hear John's answer for a long time. Pyro was staring blankly at Juggernaut, standing proudly not far away. He had been famous for this senior who had rampaged in the human world for a long time, and he was no stranger to his deeds. If it was just Ross himself, then he wouldn't consider playing for ordinary people at all, but now seeing another familiar face from Mutant Senior and Brotherhood is beside him, John's heart is just like Todd's back then, unknowingly some shaken. What about the Liberty Island incident? Why did you attack us? Sheen's deep voice sounded, her body trembling slightly. She kept her head down as if she didn't dare to meet Ross's gaze. It was an accident. I was just trying to take something, and you guys were right in front of me. Ross looked at Phoenix in the shadows and picked something behind Momo. Now please choose, stand with me and share a broad future together, or continue to stay there. sticking to the wrong path that will never have hope, he said lightly, and the black figure slowly vibrated again. Exchanging glances with the others, Wolverine rushed over first. My choice is never. With this roar, he thrust out his sharp claws. The sharp alloy blade reflected the strong light from the helicopter outside the window and stabbed straight towards Roskshing's mouth. No matter how fast the enemy was, Logan believed that as long as his claws caught the opponent's body, no one could stop his full blow with flesh and blood. Behind him, Ororo mustered all his strength and spread out his hands, and two torrents of vortex quickly converged towards her palms from all around. Students such as Iceman and Colossus also used their abilities one after another. For a while, the air was as cold as frost, and the iron arm was shiny. Only Pyro John took out his lighter in a daze, hesitant to make up his mind. At this moment, the battle between Wolverine and Ross entered a fierce state. Under Ross's super speed, Wolverine's movements were extremely slow. Facing the stabbing alloy claws, Ross turned sideways and rushed in, grabbing his wrist. Many people say that Wolverine has a steel and iron frame, and some say that your claws are indestructible, but I have been wondering for a long time, which one is stronger between them? As Ross said, he forcibly folded Wolverine's arm back and slashed at the other hand. Oh! Wolverine roared, trying to pull back the arm that had fallen into the enemy's control, but after repeated struggles, he found himself as if he was being pressed by a huge rock, unable to move at all, and could only watch helplessly. The bent claw swung towards his body. Logan! Seeing that her friend was in danger, Storm immediately swung two whirlwinds. Iceman released freezing air at Ross' feet, and at the same time the young Colossus also started his own brave charge. Peter, don't come here. Wolverine yelled at Colossus in a hurry, but his people were dragged by Ross involuntarily. In terms of physical strength alone, he is much stronger than ordinary people, but excluding the alloy bones and self-healing ability, he is still a little behind Spider-Man Peter, and he has no chance of winning against Ross, who has been strengthened again. Among the people present, the only thing that could make Ross feel scruples was Sheen, who could go crazy at any time. But he knows that Phoenix is not without weaknesses. Even if she exerts all her energy, her fragile human body can still be severely damaged or killed. Facing the impact of Colossus, Ross held Wolverine's sharp claws and swung it over. The sound of crisp metal bumping sounded immediately before proving which Wolverine's claws or bones are stronger. Colossus used his young body to have a peak confrontation with the weapons of his predecessors. They seemed to want to prove a fact to Ross. Who was the toughest? Body of. Light and shadow flickered. Behind the wall beyond the helicopter light outside the window, a series of small sparks erupted, and the sharp blade and iron arm collided with each other, forming a long, dazzling light band in the dim shadow, like a spinning firework rising into the sky. As bright and charming. People. In just a split second, the dazzling sparks spread to the surroundings. Ororo's miniature storm was dotted with silver sparks, making it as vast and shining as a galaxy in the night sky, while Barbie's icy ground did not have any stopping effect at all. Ross commanded Wolverine's arm, rotating and moving his whole body on the ice like a puppet, and quickly and violently slashed at Colossus. But within 2 breaths, the young Colossus was already at a loss for what to do. There were bruises all over his upper body. When Pyramid John finally decided to join the battle group and sent a fireball to save his friend, Ross had already pulled up Wolverine and pounced on his opponent, knocking Steel out with a huge impact force. Before Colossus landed on the ground, Stormgirl and the students were counterattacked by Ross at the same time. They saw nothing before their eyes, and then they were blasted high into the air by a strong force, drawing a long arc and falling far away. Next to the corner. Boom! At the moment, John's fireball slowly flew behind the enemy, and a blazing flame burst out in the center of the hall. The orange flame illuminated the building that was about to be completely destroyed. Zhang, the opponents were all knocked down. Ross couldn't be more merciless, and swung his sharp claws with his backhand to chop them off. After a tooth-piercing metallic fricative sound, Wolverine screamed loudly while holding his bare wrist. Oh, it seems that the claws are sharper. Ross coldly dropped the broken arm, stepped over the writhing opponent lying in a pool of blood, and walked towards the only Sheen who did not participate in the attack. Why didn't you do it just now? His voice was unusually gentle. I've been waiting for you to show me your strength. Don't force me. Please? Sheen tried her best to endure the increasingly violent emotions in her heart and retreated step by step. Her reddish Mount eyes were continuously engulfed by heavy haze. Ross still approached without realizing it, and stopped until he was about to push her against the wall. I have been paying attention to you, and I see the shadow in your heart. In fact, we are very similar. I know your distress. Neither heaven nor hell can give you comfort. Only ourselves, small and lonely, struggling in the dark, fighting each other. But I can help you. Really? S.H.I.E.L.D raised her face and asked innocently. The moment she raised her head, her clear eyes were completely enveloped by the boiling darkness. Go to hell, she yelled, about to burst out with destructive energy, and then her body shook violently. Black aura looked down slowly. A pistol was pressed between her curvaceous double peaks, and the place where the cold muzzle met the warm skirt slowly emitted gunpowder smoke at the same time. A dark scar gradually spread on the chest. This is the weapon that Ross snatched from Stryker. It was originally a pistol that Stryker used for self-defense, but it was quietly carried behind by Ross, and it was not used on the piano body swallowed by darkness until this moment. In the original world, S.H.I.E.L.D, who fell into darkness, was killed by Wolverine's adamantium claws, but in Ross's world, her body could not withstand the blow of alloy bullets. S.H.I.E.L.D couldn't hear what the companions shouted. Her consciousness gradually blurred. The whole world turned into an erratic light and shadow, and the dark personality that was originally noisy and boiling quickly dissipated with the fading of vitality. Ross pinched her delicate chin, carefully observed the pair of lifeless eyes, until there was no trace of tyranny left, then bent down and gently hugged S.H.I.E.L.D's body. At this time, Todd and others had completed the task and successfully took out the holographic simulation equipment of the danger room that Professor X used to simulate enemy actions and teach students to gain practical combat experience. Give her treatment, and take the others away together. Ross gave brief instructions, and then his figure swayed for a while, disappearing into the dark and deep night like drops of water melting into the sea.
Thanks for watching. You can find the next videos in the playlist linked in the info card, directly on my channel, or right here on the screen. And as always, if you have any feedback, feel free to share it in the comments too.